I guess.
Checking it. Looks like both of these are on. So we welcome everybody. And my name is David Bird. I'm the chair. It's my privilege to be the chair of our organization. We've got a combination of a general session and an overall morning session that hopefully is very exciting. This is the first time we've done a webinar of this general session. So right now we are live to others watching. And so comments from the audience will be part of that. I think we have about 70 people who are viewing this outside of this room, which was a pretty big surprise to many of us. And I think the people who are viewing, and you know who you are because you're viewing, are probably expert panel members who are ready to roll with 8th edition work. So that's pretty exciting. We welcome those of you who are not in the room here, and I welcome everybody in the room here. There's some general announcements. One regarding the webinar part is it's important to have the microphones at your stations off unless you are speaking, in which case please turn them on. But please remember to turn them off when you're finished speaking.
And you don't have to hold the button down. Just push the button, and when you see green, you're live. And then hit the button again, you're off.
And if you see one around you that looks like it's on and shouldn't be, please remind your neighbor. We've got a number of guests and recognitions to talk about, so I'm going to do some just general introductory comments. First is our welcome of new members. So I'm clicking here. Let's try clicking here. I'm not advancing from here. There we go. So some of these are actually not new this year, but this is their first meeting. Dr. Lisa Carey is a member of ASCO and part of our executive team as well. Dr. Ted Gansler is here representing the American Cancer Society. And again, these are from 2013, but I believe these are your first annual meeting. So we welcome you. Others are Catherine Green, who I saw earlier. There she is in the back, radiation oncologist and representing ASTRO. Dennis Krause was also here yesterday representing the American Head and Neck Society. And I don't see him here yet this morning. He's there? Good morning. Dr. John Shrigley, who I did see earlier this morning right in the back, representing the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer. Welcome. Timothy Stiles, Dr. Timothy Stiles representing the CDC, and this is his first meeting as well. So these are members from 2013. We welcome all of you to the annual meeting. Additionally, John Wagner is new, and this is a new group that's joined us, the American Association for Pathologist Assistants. Those of us certainly on the surgical side and the pathology side know the critical importance of this group. The request was made about a year ago and was enthusiastically endorsed to become a member, and I believe your association is now our 20th member of the AJCC. Dr. Jeremy Warner, also representing ASCO, is here. Now, these are our brand new members. Dr. Stephen Borgian, who I know was here yesterday at the Membership and Bylaws Committee. Welcome. Representing the Society of Urologic Oncology, Dr. George Chang, also saw him. There, George, representing the American Society of Colon and Rectal Surgeons. Dr. Michael Cook, representing the American Urologic Association. We're pretty heavy on urologists, with Judd Mowell still staying on as our membership and bylaws. We got 3 of them here, so watch out. And Teresa Valorand. Teresa was also here. Welcome, representing NCRA. We have some guests here that I want to recognize. We have our keynote speaker who will introduce when he comes. I think this is going to be an exciting capstone of the morning, and I encourage you to make sure you stick around for this presentation. I know Marty Madera, our manager, and several others heard him speak at an interoperative symposium here about 3 months ago and said this guy is the real thing. He can really tell us how we can be integrating into electronic health systems and others. He's already gone, but Otis Browley, the Chief Medical Officer of the American Cancer Society, made a special trip out, was here 2 nights ago and yesterday to discuss with us how the American Cancer Society can support our work in a very creative way. That was not only a breath of fresh air of new ideas, but also his presence here made a big statement, along with Stephanie Van Winkle in the back. And Stephanie has been one of our advocates for a long time, and we're quite excited that they came out just for that visit, so I want to recognize them, even though Otis is not here. We have the M Group, which is our consultant led by Janet Mitchell, Shaquille Rashad, and Richard Heffernan, who, as you'll hear later on, have really helped us go forward with our business model. We had originally looked at this group as a branding group, I believe, and as a consultant, and then we realized they had a skill set way, way beyond branding that fit beautifully into our needs, and we're quite excited that Janet and her team are here for the whole meeting. We have some staff updates. Karen Pollitt was not able to be here this morning. Those of you who have been part of AJCC will know Karen Pollitt probably very well. Karen was our AJCC manager for, I believe, 9 years, is that correct? She is still part of the American College of Surgeons here as the senior manager for the NAPBC, the Breast Cancer Accreditation Program, but is sorely missed by us because she was not only a terrific person, but an absolutely outstanding manager. I did want to put a picture in here because we did recognize her at our spring executive retreat, and she was given, one of the gifts she was given was a quilted chair cover with the AJCC logo on it. And she is AJCC, so I think she was very appreciative of that. And this is just a photo showing Dr. Winchester presenting that to Karen in the next room over there back in April. Marty Madera is our new manager. Marty has some family health issues this morning. He may be around this afternoon. And he stepped in very ably for in some big shoes that Karen had laid out there, and is fully on board with our steps going forward. Ashley Yanello right here, who we had on as a temp up until several months ago, and we finally decided, why are we saying temp? We need to keep her full-time. And she came on originally for web design development, but has shown a broad skill set and has fit into the team beautifully. We want to welcome her, and her official title is Electronic Production Administrator. Sounds very important. We have some recognition. We have 2 members who are leaving as members of AJCC. However, actually both of them were felt to be valuable enough that they're actually, we tagged them in their committee roles to stay on. One is Judd Mao. Judd, are you here? Please come up. Judd has represented the American Urologic Association from 2009 to 2014. I feel like your participation is valuable enough, not just to give you a plaque, but to make sure we convince you to stay on. And he is a member, he's chairing our membership bylaws, and we really want to thank you very much. Dr. Lallier. Dr. Lallier has been representing the Society of Gynecologic Oncology also since 2009, and I would say has been one of the most, maybe even the most engaged member of AJCC since its inception. As you know, as new members, we invite you to come look at all the committees you could join. We asked you to join at least one, and he and Scott Kurtzman actually joined all 4 and have been on all 4. Alex has also been the vice chair of the Education Committee, and we've asked him to stay on in either that capacity or as an ad hoc member. I'm not sure your designation because of his valuable contribution, but this is to recognize your 5 years of service so far and your full engagement. Thank you, Alex. I'm going to do a short session on the year in review, and then we're going to really get into the excitement of the 8th edition work that Dr. Amin will tell you about. And I can tell you that as the incoming chair this year, no one should have to follow Carolyn Compton, probably in anything in life, but particularly with a role like this or her inspirational qualities. I'm more of a get down to business. How can we organize? How can we bridge build? How can we connect people? And how can we get equal airtime in a meeting that I'll try to facilitate later? So I'm going to be a little more nuts and bolts about what we've been doing, but I can tell you I've never seen the the work and the breadth of what we're doing any greater than this past year. There are about 10 balls in the air, and many of them are orbiting around each other, and it's the busiest time I've seen. I've used the word all hands on deck in the last day at least 2 or 3 times on 2 to 3 different things. So it's been an incredibly busy year. This just touches on some of the highlights of what's been going on. And I'll talk a little bit about these topics. I'm not going to name them out here and say this is the topics I'll cover. With the web redesign, those of you who have seen our web page, hopefully you've gone on the web page since you're members, we may recognize this from, a year and a half ago or so, 2 years maybe? 1 year. Ashley would know. This is what we had as our web page. It was okay, but most of us thought we've all seen better web pages than this. It hadn't done any work on it since it started. This is our new web page. You just look at it, it just looks better. I mean, even the pictures look better, colors look better. This is just really started. I think there's a lot more that can populate this. We would look forward to your input, to Ashley or us, to what should go into this and what is missing or how it could be navigated better. So please go on the website, not necessarily at this moment, but to come up with any suggestions and see what's there. We're also on Twitter, and I think that Ashley's given a great presentation to our Education and Promotions Committee yesterday about what's going on with that. And we actually have a hashtag for this meeting, so it's listed here. So those of you in the audience here or those on the webinar who wish to make comments on Twitter, we will be able to see, certainly people who aren't here, this is one way we can hear you through Twitter, and maybe Ashley can pull those out and get a greatest hits to us sometime in the morning to see what kind of hits we're getting. Of interest, we now have 5,000 followers on Twitter with almost 1,000 tweets in 1 year, which we think is a very good start. And I don't know, we did a poll yesterday. Maybe I'll try this room as well. Let's see a generational thing. How many in this room are on have an account on Twitter and use Twitter? Well, you got all Janet's group doing it. So actually, there's a little more than I thought, but I saw some of the hands were like this. It's like I'm doing it, but I'm not sure I want this crowd to know I'm doing it. But you know, pretty soon the hands are going to be like that. You know, so I didn't raise my hand, and these two didn't either. We're working on it. We did launch stageXchange, and stageXchange is our information management system. It's based on SharePoint. Many of you have probably used SharePoint in your own institutions. It's a way to communicate ongoing work in a way that can be retrieved and entered and distributed at the time that people choose to enter it. And we'll show some examples of that, and Dr. Amin will show how that's working with the 8th edition work. We already have an executive committee page, and I hope everybody on exec has actually gone on this and seen the series of folders that represents the minutes from meetings, ongoing meetings, discussions, other folders that are there. The editorial board page is now active and live. We have built the 18 expert panel pages. They're not alive yet. They'll be ready to go next month. And the committee sites themselves will go live before the end of the year. And we're still defining what accessibility there'll be for every member to have. And I don't think we've quite nailed exactly what that will be, but there'll certainly be some access so you can stay more in touch with what's going on. As I talked to the new members yesterday, I think the main way to stay in touch with what's going on with this organization is to join the committees, because there are quarterly conference calls that happen in addition to this once-a-year meeting. When we just talk at you at an annual meeting, you cannot possibly retain it. You can't stay as engaged. And one of the things you'll see we're doing in this general session, we have an interactive session that we're trying for the first time, and we hope that will be the first of many to really make this a true dialogue and not just a monologue. We really want to know what our membership wants and needs. This is just an example of what the 8th edition stageXchange website would look like. For example, I don't know how well that projects on your screen, if you're on the breast committee and you want to know what the evidence-based medicine core is doing, you can click on each of those separately and find out how they're interacting together. And within this are pages with folders that you'll have access to. So this is going to be our means of communication, both organizationally and with our 8th edition work. we're quite excited that that's up and rolling. And any of you who need to find out how to get on, who's the best person to contact? Ashley. So come to Ashley in the break and let her know that you'd like to make sure you know how to get on, because if you can't get on and get a password, it's very frustrating and you're likely not to get on. This doesn't project well, but I just put this down to show that our staff have actually been using stageXchange in their daily workflow for the past year or so. And this is just a representation of, there have been over 500 tasks since January that are in this, and they all, you know exactly when the task is there, who's accountable for it, and when it gets done. So this is how the workflow is happening with our staff. Just so you know, that's how it's going on. Another big piece of work that's happened in the past year is both decision-making and a transition for collaborative stage. I know most people don't know a lot about collaborative stage. I think that probably Steve Edge knows the most about collaborative stage of anybody in the room. Collaborative stage, I believe, began in 1998 as a way to consolidate the information that was being gathered by AJCC for T&M staging, by the NCI SEER group for summary stage, and by the state registries to collect data. And they weren't all the same. So collaborative stage, using the word collaboration, brought together, and everybody was collecting the same information, so all three groups would use them. The concept was a great concept. What we found is the size and the breadth and the resource need for that became unsustainable. So a very difficult decision was made about a year ago, I believe, to actually have collaborative stage phase out and go back to AJCC staging for collection for all of our registrars. So that's not a turn off the spigot type thing. This is something that's going to take some time. And it's important to know that AJCC is committed to the education of that transition to the entire registrar community, and whatever it takes to do that, we're going to make sure that happens. There was a release of the 2.05 CS version last December, and CS will be in place through 2015. Is that right? Through 2015, but during that time, the registrar community will be transitioning to collecting AJCC staging. This is a big change. We know it's a disruptive change, and we're going to try to facilitate that through AJCC. Another piece of important work, which was more educational for us, I think, than practically helpful in the way we thought it might be, was through a consultant, the group called ASCAN, and our cancer staging content transformation project. And what we learned, we brought in ASCAN as a consultant because it became clear that our method of putting our work forward had always been through a print manual. We know that print is rapidly falling by the wayside. We still think there's going to be a need for print, and that's why 8th edition products will include that. But more and more people are going either partially or exclusively to electronic format. No one can be behind in that. The industry standards for this in most businesses are way ahead of the entire medical community, but the medical community is starting to catch up, and you're going to hear a lot about that this afternoon in John Halamka's talk. So ASCAN came in and just taught us about anything from information mapping to structured authoring, concepts that were new to many of us, and showed us, they took several of our chapters in the 7th edition and showed how that can be formatted in a way that's way more readable, way more efficient in the use of words, and more understandable and retainable, if you will. And you're going to hear more about that from Dr. Amin in his talk. And we learned a lot from that group. It was a very expensive learning adventure for us, but we took some lessons home from that, and I'll speak in a second about how the in-group has helped us kind of pull that back in. So they helped us map 12 chapters of the 7th edition. Importantly, converted 12 of the chapters into XML, extensible markup language, which is a DITA XML, for example, is a machine-readable version of whatever you put forward, so it doesn't have to have a human interface, and that's about my depth of my understanding of there, so I'm not going to go further on that topic. They helped in developing writing standards, that we have decided not to burden our 8th edition panels, but will end up being converted to a structured format after the writing is done in Word, and you'll hear a lot more about that from Dr. Amin. And they also help us provide a chapter template for what might go into each chapter. You may or may not know, when we did this process before, this was relatively loose, where we take the best experts in the world on a given disease site, and we say, go forth. And by the way, this is the general format that your chapter is going to have, but there was a lot of leeway in how that was carried out. Therefore, we had quite a variable product in terms of chapter to chapter when you tried to compare it, including things like definitions and lack of data harmonization. Another piece of important work came out of the molecular modelers group that Carolyn Compton ran, and this was a venture that was started by Carolyn with a group of experts in anything from mostly statistical expertise, but also disease site expertise and nomogram development and others of tools that were being used to help in the personalization of medicine or precision medicine. And that group got together and worked for quite a while and is going to continue as a precision medicine core that you'll hear a little bit about. But I wanted to point out that helped us figure out how to go from a T&M anatomic stage and really start thinking about precision or personalized staging and what needs to go into that. There's a palpable and a tangible product from this. And is Patty Groom here? Allison? No. So Patty Groom and Allison Mayer, who was did her PhD thesis, I believe, doing this work, actually went through 5 cancer sites, our kind of top in incidence or top in mortality: breast, colorectal, lung, melanoma, and prostate. And they went through the landscape of the prognostic tools that were out there. And you're familiar with the tools, the nomograms that are out there, the adjuvant online for breast, you name it. They went through all of these. And they looked at the methodology used and the actual power of these studies to actually be a validated tool to be used. And these were all many of these were being used in the practices of clinicians. And the conclusions, at least from the prostate and the breast literature, that even finding the tools was difficult. There is no one place where you can go and find all the tools. And that's a glaring need that perhaps our organization can be the link to do that. Of the tools that were out there, the prostate cancer literature appeared to be the most advanced, but the majority of these were built on retrospective data, not prospective studies. Statistical methods are often not optimal, and less than 50% of the tools were evaluated by external validation. The conclusion was there isn't a central repository for vetted, high-quality prognostic and predictive tools for cancer care, and that's sorely needed. And I don't have the actual numbers, Carolyn, but you can probably tell us the number of tools that were, the percentage of the tools that were actually vetted and validated and really should be used for these disease sites was somewhere in the 20% or less range. 20%, and these disease sites of the tools that were being touted actually should be being used is what it came out to. And this work was presented as an abstract at ASCO in 2013, and there'll be at least 4 manuscripts coming out from this that I strongly encourage you to read. Also, if you want to look at the white paper that Allison and Patty put out, I would bet that we can get access to that. Carolyn, you think, from them? I think we actually have that in our, I would encourage you to read this. Any of you who are in the clinical field and are using these tools, it is an eye-opener and a jaw-dropper about what we've actually been using. And that was work that AJCC sponsored. I also want to brag on our clinical scholar activity. As you may know, we and other organizations have sponsored a clinical scholar through the American College of Surgeons, and we've had Dr. Elliot Asari. Elliot is right there. And Elliot has been here for 2 years, and do we have you for another year as well? In the second year now. I want to acknowledge Elliot in addition to some of the work that he's doing that will actually end up with a part of his CV, which is working with Dr. Carl Villamoria, who's also here, working on survival calculators that go beyond T&M. As you know, in most of our chapters, we have our survival curves with stage 1 through 4 based on anatomic staging, and many of us say, where are the prognostic factors in there? The biology trumps anatomy in many of our diseases, and he's working right now on a survival calculator that hopefully all of us will be able to use. He's using the NCDB cancer database for that. There are several collaborators, as you can see there, including Dr. Winchester at the panel. And initially for breast, pancreas, and colon cancer, looking at refining the methodology, building the website. And this will be coming out. I don't know if you have an endpoint for that at all, Elliot, but we're kind of looking forward to this as a product and how we can build this into 8th edition work, for example, to have survival curves that are not just anatomic based, but also put the prognostic factors in. But I also want to mention that Elliot has put in, I don't even know the number of hours, certainly in the hundreds, maybe thousands of hours to help with all of the staff work and the 8th edition work. That, well, I don't know that we've said that publicly, but that's worth actually a round of applause for the amount of time you put in. Because a lot of that is thankless, just get the work done, and we really appreciate that. This is kind of what at least the screenshot of the early calculator may look like. This may look familiar to those calculators you may have seen. And then they even have a little side thing, if you look at the blue on the side, what this results might mean to you. So there's an attempt to put language in there that patients can understand. I don't know that all of them need to see exactly how many would be alive at a number of years, but certainly this has a patient level of communication along with the work. At least 2 other projects, maybe more, that he's been working on in staging for adrenocortical carcinoma, parathyroid carcinoma, or rare carcinoma, but there's not much out there on it, and then prognostic and survival outcome for patients with appendiceal and anal carcinoma. So hopefully, as I think Dr. Villamorio was one of the clinical scholars a few years ago, was he not? Carl, are you here? Yeah, and I don't even know how many publications you came out, but the ones I saw was probably in the 15 to 20 range. So he was about as productive a scholar, and even since then, as I've seen through this program. So thank you for mentoring your successor in the program, and I'm certain that Elliot is also very thankful for that. Just a bit on the strategic planning with the in-group. As I said, Janet Mitchell and her team are here. This slide was in the wrong spot, so I'll go to this. Janet and her team really helped us kind of take a step back and say, what are our users of our product? What do they want? What are they using, and what do they need? That was very eye-opening to tell us where we should be going and what kind of products we should be putting out. They helped us take a desire for a Cadillac and really say, if you want to actually get an 8th edition product, you're going to be looking at a minimal viable product. You need to get a great Volkswagen out here and get that going. You can build your Cadillac over time, but if you really want to put something that has an electronic deliverable in it, maybe let's get down to the good-looking Volkswagen. They've really helped us frame that and pull resources that are helpful and not as expensive as others might be to really come up with a great start. You'll hear a lot more about the 8th edition product offerings from Dr. Amin. And this afternoon, we're going to hear about a pricing analysis evaluation that she has subcontracted to present to our executive committee to say, how would we go about pricing products that are different than books? And it may be licensing, it may be sub-products, anything that we could imagine putting out, how could and should that be priced so we can remain an economically and financially viable organization. They've helped us with what is the gap analysis about where we are and where we need to be. And was Narciso here? I thought he might be at the meeting as well. Narciso Albesrin is close to his last name. It runs a consultative firm called Onto Adaptive here in Chicago, and really helped us look toward how we were going to develop an API, or application programming interface, which is a packaging of our work that can go into other venues as a package. I'm using Google all the time as the example I've seen of how APIs are often used. That was very helpful information, especially when Janet and her group put that together into how we can take that going forward. We're all seeing how SharePoint and stageXchange through using SharePoint will be the venue of how we communicate going forward. The information mapping of the 12 chapters that I mentioned that ASCAN did with us was very helpful in showing us what a product could look like that has that efficient, readable style. But now that's helped us frame how we can work with expert panels who are not used to writing in this fashion and end up translating that into a clearly readable deliverable, maybe by our next group after they finish their work. And you're going to hear more about that from Dr. Amin as well. And then Janet has also helped us frame our working relationship with the American College of Surgeons that I want to mention to you. I did want to mention what's going on with our organization in terms of the top level of the support and administrative support. We've been, AJCC, although it considers itself an agnostic organization because we have 20 members equally represented in their what they need, we are administered through the American College of Surgeons and have been since the beginning. Our workers and our staff are in this building, and that's part of what the American College puts back into us. We've been financially independent from them because we actually were doing well with our book product. As you know, with books are sold, depending on the book, most books will have a peak of sales early on, and certainly our staging manual has a big peak, and then it tails. And then in past years, at the end of the tail, we had enough in our bank to do the work for the next edition, and we just did this. And it worked quite well until now. And now it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the tail is about the same length of time, but the amount of work and budgetary needs to put the next edition is now here instead of here. So we're running into a bit of a perfect storm of our financial resources doing this with our big 8th edition work doing that, and our need to get our expert panels really up and going. And those of you on the webinar, I think, are mostly on the expert panels, and you're going to hear more about how we really plan to fully support that as we redefine where we get these finances from. What has come out of this is some new entry of support at the highest level of the American College of Surgeons. David Winchester is the Executive Director of the Cancer Programs of the American College of Surgeons. Dr. David Hoyt is the Executive Director for the American College of Surgeons. So he runs all of the programs throughout the American College in the United States. He is now personally leading our operations team with the membership that you can see here, and many of these are part of our executive team, to help us in a way that will take the financial pressures off of our backs and allow us to do the work that we think do best, which is to support the 8th edition product and the highest quality product we can have. And that, as you can imagine, has some bumpiness to it as it starts, who's in charge, who does what. But we're excited and extremely grateful to the college and to Dr. Winchester helping bring Dr. Hoyt up to speed about who we are, about this going forward. But in full transparency, we have major involvement now at the American College at the highest level for our operations, at a time when we absolutely need that to happen. Also with that, we have great support with the college CFO, Dave Vincent, and an important part of the work, there's the College Foundation. The College Foundation officer is David Krajcik, and Charles Balch, who is in the room in the back, actually is the corporate relations chair for us, but also for the American College of Surgeons. So as you can imagine, as we're trying to raise money and use foundations and philanthropy that may be disease-specific to help us with funding, this support is absolutely critical. And we're trying to define how to maximize that interaction and support from the college resources, and Drs. Balch and Winchester have been absolutely key in that relationship. Moving forward, we've got a lot of challenges ahead. We've got the economic challenge, we've got organizational challenges, we've got what kind of product we're going to put out. We've got a time challenge, and we've got 500 plus volunteers ready to go now with their expert panel work. And so there's going to be a lot going on in the next several years. I would say that the key things that we're going to be going on, we have several RFPs that will be going out for components of how we bring this forward. We have pretty well organized our informational language through stageXchange. There is this a component content transformation or management system that we also need to get in place to figure out how we can take these pieces or chunks of data and put them together into products that will be wanted and needed by our groups. We need a production team on site here that's actually going to be able to manage all this work in addition to staff. We have to watch the landscape for IT interoperability standards, and that's one of the reasons why we invited John Halamka to talk about it. I would encourage you, when you listen to his presentation, think with your staging hats about how what he presents will affect us, or we need to be on board with certain parts of that. And then continuing communication with our member organizations. Stephanie, I'm looking back at you because our relationships with the American Cancer Society, with ASCO, with the NCI, with the CDC, with all the other members is absolutely key, that we're listening to you and delivering a product that is useful to your organizations. And I'll just end in saying I can't be more excited to be having the privilege of chairing this organization. It's a lot more time than I thought it might be, but it is time well worth spent. And as far as all hands on deck, my hands are on deck. Thank you very much. I think the announcement, the real meat of what we're doing, it's my pleasure to introduce those of you, many of you know Dr. Mahul Amin. Dr. Amin is our editor-in-chief of the 8th edition process.
Thank you, David, for that fabulous overview and setting up the stage for the 8th edition staging manual. It's really an honor and privilege to be standing in front of you and representing the editorial board in what has been a very challenging but most importantly exciting project that we think will serve the entire cancer community and the patients very well. So I'm here to provide an update, but understanding that this is a webinar and that there are several of the individuals on, especially on the through the webinar that are hearing some of the issues regarding the 8th edition for the first time. I thought, in addition to providing an update, and it's important for all the participants to understand the vision and the structure and the implementation project, but also a brief sort of perspective of the journey that the AJCC has embarked from the 1st to 7th edition, because once we understand where we were and where we are going, it would give us a good idea of the challenge that we have at hand. And it's a very large body of work that we have to accomplish in a short time, and I hope that going through this presentation, you will all get motivated and inspired, as is the editorial board, to produce a fabulous 8th edition product. So a brief introduction. Some of you who've been on the editorial board have obviously heard this, but again, this is to bring everybody now. We are ready for the launch on the same page. The efforts towards a single classification for a common language of cancer began almost 80 years ago through the League of Nations, through some efforts by the International Congress of Radiology, and more closer to our time through the UICC, who is our partner in developing the 8th edition. The North American effort was first organized as the American Joint Committee for Cancer Staging and Results, as therefore the AJC in 1959. And this was really a partnership between the American College of Surgeons, the American College of Radiology, the College of American Pathologists, the College of Physicians, and the American Cancer Society and the NCI. And these organizations got together, realized the need for a common effort in the United States. The first joint meeting between the UICC and the American Joint Commission was in 1969. So we're really talking just a few decades ago. And there was an agreement, and we'll talk about how that agreement has really now blossomed into a great relationship and partnership, that the two organizations would consult with each other before they develop a classification scheme. In 1970, the American Joint Commission on Joint Committee on Cancer adopted what is called the Objectives, Rules, and Regulations of the AJC, and this really resulted in the formulation and the publication of what is the basis for the AJC. The first edition of the staging manual, again through the aegis of AJC, was in 1977. So you can see it took almost 2 decades to get all these things online. And just to put in perspective, now we're going to take the entire all the work of the 7th edition, take it to a whole new level in this era of molecular medicine and electronic health applications in 2 years or 3 years. So it's clearly that's the excitement and the challenge. So the first edition was published in 1977, and it's important as we reiterate the vision of staging, we visit the founding elements of how staging was set in 1977. And the philosophy as stated in that first edition was that staging is intended to provide the way by which the designation for the state of a cancer at various points in time can be readily communicated to others. And I'm highlighting the things that we do and intend to do most consistently, readily communicate to others, to assist in decision makings regarding treatment, and to be a factor in the judgment as to prognosis. Ultimately, it provides a mechanism for comparing like or unlike groups of cases, research and population studies, particularly in regards to the results with different therapeutic procedures. A very quick overview of what happened over the next couple of years. The term AJCC, as we use it, was selected in 1980, and in that year, the decision for much greater uniformity with the UICC definitions was adopted. Yeah, the second edition was published just 3 years. 1977 was the first, so 5 years later, and new sites were added. An observation in the preface there was that several recommendations are preliminary, and as we all know, staging is not static, and so almost every time we make recommendations, they are in a way preliminary to be built upon. The third edition was published in 1988. 1990s was an important crossroads because it was not only that the staging manuals were published and received by individuals and started to be incorporated in clinical practice, but there was a heightened awareness of the importance of staging because it was a mandate that was required by the American College of Surgeons Commission on Cancer for hospital accreditation programs, and that really stimulated the use of the AJCC for education of physicians and registrars, and with wider use, the wider incorporation. Almost every 5 years we had new editions, and in the 6th edition was the first time that non-anatomic factors were included into the modified stage groupings, and it was quite another sort of important crossroad. As we move on to the 7th edition, the one that we are following on the footsteps of, there was an expansion of relevant markers to make clear treatment decisions. And so you can see we had already embarked on the pathway towards trying to understand and incorporate markers towards a more precise prognostication and therapeutic model. Mitoses and their rates in GI stromal tumors in prostate cancer staging, PSA and Gleason score were incorporated, not within the, I'm going to see if the arrow will work here, not within the TNM staging, which is really based on the extent of disease, but into the prognostic stage groupings for the TNM stage groups, the PSA and the Gleason scores here determining patients between different stage groups. So really what was accomplished in the 30 years since was that the AJCC has, the staging system has clearly become the standard for the TNM information in a way that it is communicated worldwide. This is a system that remains in evolution. It is continuously validated. It is revisited as we are doing right now. It's restructured. and has been published, and we'll be talking about new avenues of publication as we go forward. It has become the tool by which clinicians, the surveillance, and the registrar community, researchers, patient advocates, and patients all understand the disease of cancer. And so the roles that this 8th edition plays, and it's important as we wear our hats and we try to and deliberate about the changes, is that not only is it doing the fundamental job of communication of cancer in a standardized nomenclature, but to really be incorporated on a more day-to-day basis in staging and treatment decisions and prognostication, clinical trials and eligibility and stratification. Almost all research in cancer has its fundamental basis in using AJCC as the most important classifier and stratifier, and more importantly, as we understand the impact at a population-based level, the longitudinal cancer instance, how the disease is changing over time with this uniform nomenclature, the efficacy of treatments that we all strive to provide, and the quality of care. So the persistent challenges as we've looked at the 8th edition has been that, and these are comments that are fair, and no system is perfect, is that the TNM system does not meet the need of the clinicians and patients at a more individualized level. It works certainly at the population level very well, and it's used at the individual level, but can it be more accurately tailored towards that? Can it predict the value of therapy? And one of the issues is that if we continue to just base the TNM on the anatomic extent of disease, TNM risks marginalization as more and more molecular markers come in. So the issue is, how do we take this from a population-based model that creates bins of patients into a much more individualized fashion? As we've had deliberations, we all recognize that the basis of cancer classification is the anatomic base, but we really need to build that bridge between the population-based approach to a more precision approach. Now, since the last edition, the world of cancer has changed much more dramatically. I mean, it's always evolved, but really just in the last 5 years, with the implosion of data that we have from the Human Cancer Genome Atlas, and just all the other work that the high throughput testing allows us, we understand oncogenesis, progression, resistance of cancer, and just the fact that just histologic classification or anatomic extent of disease is not just the only basis to classify. And the whole concept of molecular classification of cancer has become much more relevant, and it's just going to explode as we combine these new technologies with the information and the computational biology that comes in, because it will allow us to really catapult this information not only in the level of understanding disease, but to really take it at the patient level as it gets incorporated into electronic health records. We all know that cancer care is increasingly coordinated for well-defined multidisciplinary teams, and so as we have contemplated the 8th edition teams, we've made sure that all aspects, imaging, radiation oncology, medical oncology, surgical oncology, pathology, are all represented, as well as the registrar community. And so as the landscape has changed, it has allowed us to set the vision of what we think is going to be critical for the 8th edition. And so last year, the editorial board committed to a general understanding of what we will try to achieve with the 8th edition. And here are just 2 or 3 sort of high-level summary points. The 8th edition of the AJCC will provide and we will all together, and all those on the webinar, we seek your partnership and collaboration to achieve this. Will provide the definitive, comprehensive, proactive, evidence-based, contemporary clinical relevant taxonomy of human neoplasia. And in promoting this classification, the 8th edition will retain its base of of anatomic stage. And even though we have all these molecular markers, we'll talk about how we will integrate this, which will be enhanced by the incorporation of these biomarkers for much more accurate disease stratification. The 8th edition will retain its fundamental role in defining prognosis, and the appropriate disease management will be enhanced by the ability to guide precision therapy. We will build on the comprehensive topographic disease sites. There are approximately 7 chapters. And we will also build on our role in providing interoperable data at a much more efficient level to make the treatment and surveillance modalities much more available at the point of care. And really what we are transforming now and attempting to do is to take that book product and make these AJCC staging classifiers more applicable to the point of care that will facilitate not only just patient management at the bedside, but also for more accurate accrual, data accrual and research facilities. I just want to make sure we are plugged into the power and getting that signal. I don't know, did you get that on your screen? Okay, all right. We want to retain our role in education and advocacy of the system, and that's clearly something that we are working with the Education and Promotions Committee. Key has been to establish partners and really make this, as cancer becomes globalized and multidisciplinary, to engage as many organizations as possible, and we're delighted to continue to see new organizations join the fold. We want to retain the timely, rigorous, evidence-based, multidisciplinary approach, and we'll be talking about how we are doing this in the 8th edition. And we want to have a system whereby which this is further strengthened by a transparent, broadly inclusive process of a wider spectrum of organizations and volunteers across the country. So here's how we did it. A few slides of what we did between April of last year and September, and then we talk of what we've done in this year towards the launch. So again, it was an honor to be selected as the editor-in-chief by the executive committee to whom I report to. And really, the focus has been in the past to develop the disease site teams. But as we were thinking big in terms of how the cancer staging needs to be reorganized, we thought we would focus a lot on the infrastructure that allows the building of these disease site teams and really carry out the mission in a much more consistent fashion. And so there were several cores that were built and that were formed, an administrative core, an evidence-based medicine and statistics core. So this would be a group of individuals who would provide resources to all these disease site teams to enable their work. A precision medicine core. A very important aspect, something Dr. Bird touched upon, is that we have had inconsistency between chapters. And in this day and age, and this was largely because groups did their work and released the product. But now we are looking at standardization. We're looking at how this gets incorporated into calculators and electronic health records. And so data harmonization is very important. We have that and a data collection core to make sure that we are collecting elements in a very standardized fashion. We're defining what those common data elements are. And as is key in this day and age is that we want to be inclusive, so we have a professional organization and corporate relationship core that was also formed. So these cores have a very specific function, and it's really important for all the disease site team chairs, vice chairs, and panelists to understand that these resources are created for you. They will be interacting with you, and the more you avail of their expertise, the much better the product is. And really, it is a very key aspect of what we think is a differentiator as we go forward. And of course, then we have the editorial board. That another important aspect that was formed was an inclusive editorial board that involved all the specialties in a much more thoughtful and strategic way. The editorial board made recommendations for the disease site panels, for which, as we have acted in the past, as a panel chair, a vice chair, and if these disease sites had multiple teams, then of course team leads will be assigned. So the editorial board was formed, and really it has been such a pleasure. I mean, all the ambitious and things that we have contemplated to do could not have been done without the assistance of this editorial board. Just to give you an idea, almost once a month, and in addition to the exec, because many of these individuals serve on the executive committee too, almost every 2 weeks on a Friday morning, there's not a single person who is not on the call for the most part. And so there's just tremendous commitment. We've had multiple retreats and virtual and face-to-face. So this is not the product of a team of staff here or the editor-in-chief. This is a collective effort of your editorial board, and the work that we are doing is really a great team effort. The very thoughtfully expert panel leads, chairs, and vice chairs were selected, and they are here. And so this takes a lot of time because we went through a very organized vetting product. So really sort of a quick overview of what's new and has been accomplished as we go for the launch. We have strategically constituted the editorial board of 16 members, which includes all the major subspecialties with very well-defined roles. And none of us really know all aspects of cancer. We're going to need each other as we go into the launch phase, and when we have debates between different debates and differences between different specialties. To have that expertise within the editorial board is going to be very key. We've strategically constituted the pores, and again, the importance of using the pores. We have reorganized some of the disease sites just so that it's all manageable between the teams. We have new sort of organized teams in endocrine. The male genital, it was really one is now split into male genital, which is prostate, penis, testis, and the kidney and urinary bladder, so they've been split. Thoracic has now included thymomas. And we had an intent to include pediatric malignancies, but our conversations with the leadership have not been that fruitful, and given all the ambitious things we are planning to do, we have put that aside for yet another addition. But we'd clearly love to get inclusive of pediatric malignancies. We've had a fabulous relationship with UICC, but we want to make sure that we really tap into the resources and work much more proactively with the UICC. We have invited Dr. Jim Briley, who's here on the executive committee, to be the UICC liaison, and he has appointed a team of people who will work on each of the disease site teams. So as many of you on the webinar have UICC panelists, it's really important to tap into their expertise and make sure that they are on board, because they are going to align with the mission and vision with UICC, which aligns very closely with the AJCC. We have expanded, as we talked about, the philanthropy through the professional organization and corporate relation core. I'll talk a little about this because Dr. Bird is already in a subsequent slide, but suffice it to say, given the perfect storm of how the 8th edition, the 7th edition sales are now down, and we have an ambitious project, we clearly need support from philanthropy, and we are very excited that Dr. Charles Walsh, I'll begin by plugging in his name and bring it in again, who will work very closely with any of you who have contacts with bringing in additional support dollars for our effort. We had a very interesting and important project that we had a call for contributors, and we had over 400 individuals from around the country who applied for serving on the AJCC. We chose about over 220 from the 400, so first clearly we couldn't get everybody who volunteered to be on. But we're very excited because we've really brought in more people under the fold, under the tent, to contribute to the AJCC. And the leadership that we brought in, even in the editorial board, there are 5 or 6 members who have not been previously involved with the AJCC, and certainly that with the chair and vice chairs. But we've had that more strategically, keeping succession planning in mind and making sure that this process truly is multidisciplinary, and we want to make sure that all facets that are important for cancer care are included in this process. Clearly, the very important role that precision medicine core will bring in is new, and the evidence-based medicine and statistics core. So this was a quick journey of what we did until last April and brought everybody up to speed. So let's talk about where we were a year ago and where we are going. Last year, we made a very important decision at this meeting, and that is to postpone the 8th edition timeline for another year. And there were only two driving factors. One, a very strategic look at how the product of the 8th edition could be integrated into much more electronic formats that are much more applicable and the need of the hour. And the second was that the timing was probably a little more premature, as some of the exciting studies and work that was done needed time to build up. So we needed time for data to mature. We needed time to do the strategic thinking. And so we agreed last year that we're going to postpone the 8th edition to yet another year. And then we took another important decision, because we've been talking about this for many years, is how do we build this bridge much more in a defined fashion between the population base and the precision medicine. And so at the editorial board, in two meetings we had agreed that we are committed to maintain the anatomic extent of disease as the foundation of the AJCC, but we are committed to incorporate non-anatomic factors, including molecular markers, to make this transition from a personalized to from a population-based to a more personalized approach. And that these non-anatomic factors are not only molecular, they could be clinical parameters, histologic parameters, serum and biochemical markers, as well as molecular markers. And we realized that as we are looking at how these get integrated at the point of care, there's probably not that one-size-fits-all model. Until now, we had stage groupings and TNM and one model that really worked, and we will have to look at newer ways as some of this data gets incorporated into the staging. So the way at least we have a concept building up is that we would use the TNM as the core, the basis, the foundation on which we will build staging. But then we will evaluate the site-specific prognostic and predictive factors, and these could be, as we said, clinical, histologic, serum, or molecular. But then really the charge of how this gets translated into electronic products has been handed to the personalized medicine core, who's going to work very closely with the evidence-based medicine core to deliver those models. And what we have decided is that we will choose 5 sites: breast, melanoma, colon, prostate, and lung, to formally visit this and to build what we would call AJCC-approved prognostic or predictive risk calculating models. This does not mean that all other sites will ignore molecular markers. They will incorporate non-anatomic factors, but these 5 sites will be taking it potentially to the new level in terms of making sure that these prognostic factors are built into electronic models. Other aspects that are new is that this change will come in as we weigh new prognostic factors. Is we want to take our culture of evaluating new recommendations and changes to a whole new level, taking into base the principles of evidence-based. And so we charged Dr. Hess, who is our lead for the evidence-based medicine, evidence-based medicine and statistics core, and he and his team proposed a set of guidelines and principles by which we will evaluate markers and changes that we think will go into the making of the 8th edition. So this is a very fundamental, relatively simple at one level, but a key aspect as we critically look at the literature, and then we are transparent to the cancer community as to how we have evaluated that literature. And so that's a very exciting aspect of this, of the 8th edition. And we really require your support, those on a webinar, in making sure that we really incorporate and build into our decision-making tree factor in evidence-based medicine rules. So at this meeting, just yesterday, we approved the levels of evidence that were proposed by the committee to evaluate stage change recommendations. And to be very clear and just make sure everybody understands, this is not meant to be a roadblock or a bar that must be reached. It will help, most importantly, evaluate the quality of evidence in support of the proposed changes, but not to restrict implementation. It is a way to look at evidence and be transparent as to how we have done so. Since last summer, we worked very hard in making sure, because there are so many moving parts here, that there is one resource where anybody who's coming into the field can understand what's going on. What's the role of the editor-in-chief? What's the role of the editorial board? What's the role of the course? And so we developed this a resource. It's a booklet available electronically. It's called On Stage, to play on the word staging. It's 38 pages. We really ask you to skim through this because it gives you in one place what is the role of the course, what is your role as team leaders, what is your role as a team member, how do these cores interact, how does this entire process come into play. So really a very important request and plea from the entire editorial board to just peruse through these 38 pages. Will give you a very quick idea as to all the work that is required in this very complex process. We need to talk to each other. We need teams to talk to each other. And Dr. Bird had talked about the format, the avenue by which we will communicate. It's called, again, StageXchange. It's built very simply on a Microsoft SharePoint product. It's accessible online. You do not need any special software. So once you go through the training, and as we have referred to, any questions, take it to Ashley or Laura. They will initiate you into understanding and using StageXchange. But once you have it, you can click to your site. You can see there are all these different icons, and you can even get the phone numbers of everybody on your team. So once you wanted to contact somebody, you get phone numbers for liaisons. You will get literature review. You will get the staging rules. So a lot of information is pre-populated on this. A tremendous amount of work has gone into this, and we really think that between the on-stage and StageXchange, you should have all the necessary information that is important now to go and do the important work of the stage deliberations and recommendations. So here is the importance of the professional organization and corporate relations core. Not only are we focused on bringing in new organizations into the tent, but because of the issues that Dr. Bird mentioned in terms of where we are and an ambitious, it's not only just winding down with this and surviving with the sales of the new edition, but we're thinking big, as we will show in the next few slides about the electronic transformation. And therefore, we need funding. And I cannot emphasize enough that all of us who are here, and there are basically almost 400 members who are involved with the staging, each of us have contacts with organizations, foundations, industry, and pharma, industry including pharma, that could help support this very important and very complex and arduous and expensive task of the 8th edition. And we really urge you, I'm not going to go into the details, but basically two names to remember: Martin Modera, the manager, and Charles Walsh, who you all know through prior AJCC leadership roles. Contact them. Once you have the names, they will do the rest. But we need those names, and we need your support for this. So now let's kind of talk about the electronic transformation part. And to understand that, there are probably two terms you need to understand: content management system. We'll talk about that, and the application programming interface. And basically, the content that you develop in Word, so nothing different from what the leaders will do in the disease site teams, will be then transformed into the electronic applications by a content management system that takes this data, chunks it, and then can parse it into different avenues. through an API system. And this will enable meaningful EHR integration, creating real-time iterative electronic derivative products, and most importantly, focus on clarity, accuracy from a single source of content distribution on multiple platforms. And so the way this works is that everything that you as expert panels put into the content management system will be put into a content management system, and then through an API, through an XML interface, the different products from a staging manual to electronic staging calculators, online products, and other products will be developed through this content management system. So it is for harmonization across all chapters to facilitate standardized incorporation into electronic health products and publications, and it is centered around three basic principles: use, utility, and maintainability. So once we do this body of work, this is then can be taken into multiple products that we have not even envisioned thus far. And so at a very high level, this effort will allow the content quality to come from a single electronic source. It will allow publication in multiple formats from that single source. It will allow updating the staging system on a very regular and potentially much more iterative basis. Most importantly, it will harmonize terminology and structure across staging systems, enhance content to eliminate errors between staging rule applications, provide extensive flexibility for licensing and creating new products, fulfill the AJCC business plan, which is under evolution, to make it much more self-sufficient for future product development. Now, what does this mean for you all? The experts will focus on what the experts do well. That is a very critical review of literature, deliberations, recommendations, chapter authoring, all to be done in the Word format. So that aspect will not change. When the final content is developed and approved by the editorial board, this will be put into that content management system, into that single source, and then from that source, multiple other applications will be derived. So here is a pictorial depiction of what you will be doing, the expert panels and the expert chair and vice chair, and the panels you lead, your discussions, deliberations, recommendations, all through SharePoint. You're writing the chapter in Word format, and then handing over the process to the content management system. More in an XML format, using the interface system, there will be this development of these electronic applications. Your job just doesn't end, at least for the leaders, doesn't end with this Word product. After we develop these products, we would like to have your input again to make sure that it is appropriately translated and validated. So we'll be coming back with you, but there'll be a breather of 4 to 6 months between the work that is done in the authoring phase and then in the validation phase. So here's what we've done. Now we're ready for launch. It's very exciting. Finally, the day has come. I can see Dr. Winchester smiling and Dr. Bird and all of us. We really had a very long and arduous effort. But what have we accomplished at a very high level? We have a structure in place that will hopefully place us well for not only a great edition, but for future editions. We have a process in place where we can really meaningfully interact with one another. We focus very heavily on standardization. It's the need of the hour, it's need of medicine, and it's need that it's an important aspect that AJCC had to focus on. We have now a strategy, a journey that we have embarked, that we have a plan for to get into a more personalized medicine approach. We have much more rigorously brought in the desire to have evidence-based principles into our decision-making process. And we have a roadmap. And of course, all of these many balls are in the air, but we ultimately believe if we could get this far, I have no reason why we won't get further. But we have a roadmap to electronic applications and point-of-care products. So the standardization, just 2 things to mention about that. The editorial board has developed, and again, as mentioned by Dr. Bird, a standardized chapter outline. And this will serve as a template for most of the chapters. And it is very important that all the disease site chairs and vice chairs and the panelists adhere to these standard chapter outlines. The second part, which is also very important, is here I'm going to put in a pitch for a very important effort that Dr. Gershenwald is leading in his role as the chair of the Content Harmonization Core, is we've had staging rules. And for the last 2-3 editions, as we've deliberated on what needs to get changed within each of the organ sites, we haven't really focused on consistency of staging rules, which are fundamental to applications in all chapters. And so Dr. Gershenwald and our staff will be sending out to several of you, all of course on the editorial board, many individuals from different organizations, and select chairs and vice chairs, to give them input about inconsistencies, ambiguities, issues that are really need to be clarified at this point. So this is a very important foundational step. We haven't yet embarked on this, but this is time sensitive, and we hope that you'll be getting this information in the next couple of weeks so that then Dr. Gershenwald and the staff can put all the staff together and make that recommendation to all by January. For any of these ambiguities, the process will be outlined. Yesterday we thought we'd get back to Donna, you'd get back to Donna and Laura. Probably the process, but you'll get that information when you get the chapter to review of the staging rules. So we were ready for a launch as we take off on October 1. Here's what each panel has to do. So I'm going to break it at very high level for what we need to do. So between September 2014, the launch is October 1. We hope we have a great liftoff. We would like that each expert panel, through the chair and vice chair, have a very critical review of the literature. Again, on stage, we've had UICC experts really review some of the literature and condense that for us. So all the relevant literature, some of the major papers are all on stage. So it just needs a critical review, not coming from evidence-based, but to an evidence-based approach. A very critical aspect is to review the literature. For deliberations, and following on something that I've heard from Dr. Bird and really learned, is equal air time for all the participants. It is very important for chairs and vice chairs to really make sure we have an average of 20 participants from different multiple disciplines coming in, and we really need to make sure that these deliberations incorporate the voice of all in an evidence-based manner. And finally, after literature review and deliberations, will be the staging recommendations and chapter writing. At this point, the question comes is, how is this going to happen? So we're going to use stageXchange, we're going to use SharePoint, and the question comes, will there be face-to-face meetings? And what we are asking for each chair and vice chair to make is to work with just to make sure we have talked to each of the chair and vice chair, but each of you all, chairs and vice chair, they have an editorial board liaison. And we would like the chair and vice chair to make a case to the editorial board liaison as to what they see as happening in the 8th edition and whether there is a need for a face-to-face meeting. And that then will go to the editorial board for consideration for funding. So the plan is for you all to now start deliberations and literature review and come back to us with a project plan of how you plan to begin this job in October and really deliver a product by the summer. Now, this does not mean that you have to wait, as we all do, till April, May, June, and come up with a product. This work has to occur here. We feel, and the editorial board members will be working with some of the teams where the deliberations need to be less involved because of the field they are in. And we are hoping that some of the chapters roll in as early as December of 2014. Because this is a cycle. This is not, we are dealing with 18 sites and 60 chapters. We cannot wait for 60 chapters to come in at the end. So it's really important that everybody understands that the work needs to occur now, and that as the chapters are completed, you really go through the workflow process, because what will happen as after this launch is that we're going to focus and say we get a chapter in January. We're going to pass it to that electronic the product development team. And as that work and the RFP is getting evolved and decided upon, they will have the first pilot projects to start looking at how an electronic product could look like. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. So it will start early, but July through January 2016, after you finish the chapters, we'll begin the electronic product development. And around February, that's the second time that we will be reaching back to the team leads when we will be asking you to validate your electronic, the electronic products that have been developed. And we hope that once all this validation occurs, the entire incorporation of the XML integration, the print design, the electronic and product, everything is developed by September of 2016. If all this goes well and the man has landed on the moon and we do what we need to do, we hope that the electronic products are available for EHR integration by October 2016 and for incorporation in clinical care by 2017. So you can see why there are sort of 3 or 4 buzz terms: ambitious, aggressive, challenging, exciting. They're all embodied in this 8th edition project, and we cannot do it without the support of each and every one of you. So that's a request, that's a plea, and we thank you for all the work that's happened thus far and hope that by this year, we have most of the chapters done. Thank you very much.
So we're a little behind in terms of questions. I think I would hold those for to come up and talk to individuals later. We have in the program the report out of our committees, and don't have time. We're about 15 minutes behind right now. So I would, Jim Briley, once you come up, and I would ask the chairs of those committees to do just a high-level sort of 3-minute verbal summary of your committee, if you can do that in that short of time. And the way to learn more about the committees is join the committees. So if you want to hear more, join them. Quarterly conference calls, all you need to commit to.
So I can be very brief. We met end of the day yesterday, and I chaired, and Alex Olawale was the co-chair, started with a presentation by Donna Gress of the educational activities and the products that are available for registrar use on the website, and also the curriculum that's being developed for registrar use for use at TNM. And then can be even briefer with the next bit, because David stole all the best slides from a presentation on the use of the website and that's been in existence for a year now, and the use of Twitter. And also we have on the committee the editor of the CA Journal, which is great because we can liaise with them about developing articles for the 8th edition for publication in CA when that's ready. Thank you.
And that's Ted Gansler in the back who he's referring to. Thanks for that brief overview. Scott, you want to come up and that was about 2.5 minutes. That's great, Jim. Getting us back on schedule. The bar is set kind of high here.
Thank you. David J. Winchester, co-chairs the committee. As David said, this is transformational time. We went from a point where we knew what the income was, we knew what the expenses were, it was fairly simple, to a much more complex time. So as I see it, the Finance Committee's job is not to make decisions about what should be spent, but to find ways to do the things that need to be done. And we're changing. Everything has changed. We're looking for philanthropy. We're looking for sponsors. The relationship with the college has been transformed, and it's a new era for the Finance Committee. So stay tuned. It will be difficult and challenging, but I'm extraordinarily optimistic that we will transform this organization in a way that will be sustaining, so we can continue to do the good work, and that's what our committee is supposed to do. That's 1 minute.
Great. Thank you. Jeff Gershenwald.
I'm Jeff Gershenwald, Chair of the Informatics Committee with Dr. Kim Jessup. who's co-chair of the Informatics Committee. And what we talked about yesterday, I think, thematically was on how best to communicate information and data. That's really why we're all here. We're trying to effectively communicate staging information and what all the elements and stage calculations themselves can do to help us and others take care of better patients and help other agencies and organizations use that information to improve healthcare. And so with that theme, I think it was helpful for us to take a very brief strategic pause. And so we have been asking ourselves over the last roughly 2 years, what can we learn from the 7th edition content? We actually have a manual. It's now almost 4 years old to the day. I think it was the fall of, well, it was actually almost 5 years old to the day. Fall of 2009, the manual was published. And what can we learn from a data harmonization standpoint and a data element standpoint, data content standpoint from that? And so there have been some initiatives over the last year or two. Some have struggled along as we've learned how to the pros and cons of different kinds of infrastructure. And you've heard about some new developments that are very promising that can help us to better understand the data elements that we already use in clinical and registry practice on a daily basis. And so along the lines of content harmonization going forward, this is our opportunity to not only take these lessons learned from the 7th edition, but to move forward. So how do we best correct what might be inconsistencies, or at least acknowledgement of inconsistencies across chapters that had seemingly similar data elements in them that become the bane of data management and data registry teams the world over unless they're unraveled. And so the better we can do that up front allows us to also then develop a framework for how we will enter any kind of new data elements going forward. We should steal from the rich, give to the poor. So if, for example, a new data element is being considered, why should we reinvent or invent a data element that is already well characterized either within the AJCC or hopefully among several of the important national and international repositories for data elements for which we have many experts in the room yesterday and this morning as well. And so the whole theme of how to incorporate elements will become part of our workflow so that we can mitigate mistakes being made. And one of those ways is by vetting and refining the staging rules, sort of also affectionately known as Chapter 1 of the staging manual. If you take a look at the 7th edition, there's a lot of content there. It's all in prose. And so we're trying to use some of the pilot work that the AskCan information mapping team provided for us in a more tabular form. And now our job is to go through that, identify pertinent omissions, errors, room for improvement in any dimension we can, and then we can use that as the Bible, if you will, going forward for how staging can effectively be introduced into new themes. There are many opportunities for partnerships. So we talked yesterday, just very briefly, about partnerships with CAP. CAP's also part of an international consortium of pathology organizations. We talked about partnerships with the CDC and other important registry communities here, and with the NIH and many of the data leads that have been taken in all of those domains to think about how we can not only learn within our walls of the AJCC, but also to begin to map all of what we do in terms of content with the real world and think about how we could become a global harmonization team member. One legacy project from the AJCC is a couple of years old now, I think, called the Lexicon Project, and it was a proof of concept project that was initiated by Dr. Compton to identify ways for the AJCC and the UICC to really roll up their sleeves and sort of get their hands wet on things that are of mutual interest. And so a list of anatomic and some non-anatomic factors were populated, and we're going to bring that forward, maybe incorporate some of that into the staging rule dialogue that Dr. Amin talked about over the next couple of weeks to months, and then also bring that forward as opportunities for really broad-based member-driven, plural member-driven dialogue to see how we can effectively collaborate and really begin to harmonize. And so with that, there'll be ways that we need to communicate this information to electronic health records. We use that term often too euphemistically, but there's a very, very deliberate way that our staging information gets communicated and calculated within the electronic health record, and that's known as the API, or the Application Programming Interface. And that's something that we'll be developing and maturing over the coming weeks to months to years to effectively communicate our current staging system and then beyond, so that that will become a product, part of our own intellectual property, if you will, so that all electronic health records and other users, it could be a web developer, who develops the content, can maximally use our information, and we know it's accurate, because there'd be nothing worse than communicating incorrect cancer data. And so I think with that, again, an invitation, this is going to be an iterative invitation, so if you're not part of this team now, I think there's almost no member organization in the room who shouldn't be part of this effort, who doesn't want to be part of the effort, so feel free to talk to us anytime. Thank you for your attention.
Dr. Jed Mahul.
So just a very brief report on the membership bylaws committee. The key thing that we were trying to accomplish for this past year was to engage the new members earlier and to try to develop a mentorship program where the new members would feel engaged with the organization earlier. I think we accomplished that. Just recognize that I think we got virtually all the new members to this meeting, which is no small accomplishment. I want to recognize Kay Washington, who's the co-chair of this committee. And our plans moving forward is to continue to try to do some things to further engage the talent of the new members and, you know, make the new members feel a key part of the organization. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I would ask our panelists who we've recruited in the short term to come on up. And that would be Dr. Carey, Dr. Balch, Dr. Compton, Dr. Stiles, to come on up. And this session is a new session that we're trying out for the first time. And I'll, come on through here. And I'll just frame a couple of words, and I want Jim Briley to step in, because he and David Winchester really put this together. This is our interactive session. We really want to hear from you. Our panelists are not up here to spend all the airtime. I will control airtime. If somebody's talking too much, I'm going to cut you off. I'll just warn you ahead of time. It's going to happen. We really want to hear mainly from you in the audience. Anybody on the webinar, you can Twitter in, and Ashley can pull up tweets if she gets them. But I want to have Jim introduce Jim Briley again, and maybe he and David Winchester put this together, and then I'll take you through some slides.
So yes, as David said, the intention of this session is to be as interactive as possible, and the panel members are there just to look pretty more than anything else, and help the flow and give expert opinion if necessary, but really want everybody in the audience to participate as much as possible. David Winchester and I put together some slides to focus the discussion. Really, it's there in three themes. The first is about the collection of stage data, how we do it. The second is how we use stage data once it's collected. And the third is really to try and address or discuss the issues around anatomical extent of disease, prognostic factors, and predictive factors. So given the time limits, I will stop now and hand back to Dr. Bird, who's going to facilitate the discussion.
We did not build in a bio break to the morning, as you've seen, so feel free to take that as you need to. They're out this direction. So let's go ahead and start this. This is not designed, these are not yes or right or wrong answers. These are questions to find out what's happening out there, as you already heard, and then really get some dialogue about what should happen and how we go forward. So I'm going to pose the question, and again, I'd rather have answers start here and then clarification or other from our panelists, but have the answers or suggestions come here. So first, and can one of you record a general percentage of people responding, and I'll try to take a look and say 2/3 or 1/3 or 1/2 or nobody. So first question is kind of provocative, and I think in maybe the Canadian world and a lot of the world, many of us in the U.S. think of a pathologist as a non-clinician, but I think in many parts of the world, pathologists are clinicians. And so who's a clinician? Was the first provocative question put out there. Anybody want to put a plea in for a pathologist being a clinician?
I'd argue, but that would be self-motivated or the lots of conflict by microphone. And I would do
Anybody use your microphones if you're going to speak, and then turn them off after you're done.
Sure. The pathologist, in almost every diagnosis we make is based on what is the next step in terms of management. And so clearly the role of the pathologist has evolved from being a diagnostician to be really an active member in the multidisciplinary team that helps in the management with classification as the basis. There are also other things that we actually do in active. We aspirate tissues. We evaluate patients during plasmapheresis, blood banking, etc. So very active roles, coagulation disorders, etc. So I would obviously make the stand here.
Any other comments about that starting question? If not, we'll get into the staging part. So anybody who is a clinician in the room, do you record the stage of your own patients personally? Okay. Show of hands of the clinicians, at least 75+%, maybe 80%. Okay, that's not that surprising. If you do stage, do you do it in a dictated note, a staging form, both, or some other way? And maybe we can just get some comments. George, what do you do? George saying, I'm calling on. He didn't know I was going to do this.
It goes into our dictated note. We don't have a specific staging form that's utilized, but certainly is something that I know is commonly done.
So in your initial note of a new patient, you put clinical stage discreetly in your note, or do you put the language in there that registrars could pull out?
No, I use it discreetly, in fact, using all the prefix designations.
So you
for how
put
that was
the T
obtained.
categories and the clinical stage, derived stage from that in your note?
Sure. So, for example, if it's a rectal cancer patient, they may have been staged. So a typical note would read something like little m, little r, capital T, some number, n, some number, and then it'll say little c, little t, m0, for example. So to designate completely how that's done.
Okay, and that's in your dictated clinical note.
Correct.
So for registrars, that should be one of the easier ways. You got a big thumbs up from Donna Gress, who's a registrar. Others want to say how they do it? Anybody just rely on registrar extracting it and hope it's in there? Steve Edge? And then on and then off when you're done.
Our large community hospital network recently enacted a policy that clinical staging had to be incorporated onto the operative report.
Onto the operative report. Okay.
So just sort of a comment and a question. The question you asked about whether you depend on the registrars or registry for that documentation. Most registrars and registries within an academic unit would be not addressing that patient until usually about 4 months after their initial visit. And so I guess the question could be clarified a bit more for various types of purposes. What is that engagement like, and sort of brought forward, how might that engagement look in the future?
I think we got a question saying whether you use this in the care of your patients or not, coming up here in a second. Other from the audience, I know a panelist is about to speak up here. Getting a lot of executive members here piping in. Alex, go ahead, then we'll come back to the panel.
I think a little bit of this is site-specific.
Is that on?
Yeah, it's on. In GYN malignancies, 3 of our sites are surgically staged, so I have to wait for pathology report before I can assign stage. So I wouldn't give stage for ovary, uterine, or vulvar cancer. For vaginal and cervical cancers, we assign stage at the first contact with the patient.
Great. Carolyn, Colin, Compton?
I just wanted to remind people that for all the pathologist clinicians who use the College of American Pathologists cancer reporting protocols, pathologic stage designations are built in to the format of reporting, so that we never send out a pathologic evaluation of a cancer specimen without the pathologic stage parameters built into the report.
Except for M, right?
That's absolutely correct, unless we actually have tissue that documents M1.
Dr. Winchester, do you want to comment on the Commission on Cancer stance of what's required for accredited programs in terms of staging?
For both the breast program and the COC, it's part of the standards, yes.
To have the clinical staging be performed by the clinician.
Right. For the breast program specifically, we state that the patients be prospectively presented at the breast conference with a clinical stage, and then a follow-up visit after the procedure has been done for a pathologic stage for adjuvant therapy discussion.
Okay. Anybody fill out staging forms? Actually physically fill them out anymore? We used to have them all come across our desk, and I think that got better when we clinically staged. Chud? Chud now?
We still have to do it for, even though we have EPIC, certain send-out tests still require paper forms. So about twice a week, I still have to fill out AJCC stage on a paper form for certain molecular marker tests. So it's actually, comes up every week.
You have another comment?
We have a
your time.
pathway system in my program where every single patient that comes through my clinic, I actually have to complete a TNM stage on the EMR, and it's tied to my salary.
You're getting ahead of the questions. You're getting ahead of the questions here. That's a question coming up. Okay, just back to, we've already had somebody pipe up on this. Do you use the staging manual when you're staging patients for patient care? And if so, how does that show up? Anybody want to comment? Anybody hasn't spoken? Some of our new members over here. You want to give it a shot? If you're either in the clinic or you're in a multidisciplinary conference, do you have the staging manual or the information in front of you to make sure the correct categories are being used?
I don't, but I deal with 2 diseases, so I pretty much
You've got it down pretty well? Yes, sir.
So the HNS, whom I represent, has actually put together a staging manual, and I keep a copy of that in my desk. And given the disparate number of diseases that I do take care of, I find that's essential.
So do you do it at the time, are you dictating your note in your office with that in front of you, or are you doing when you're dictating the note, or when is that used?
I usually do that as part of my operative report. Our electronic record is set up in a way in which my nurse manages a significant component of that data, and so a lot of it I can most effectively do when I'm doing op reports.
So you're doing similar to what Dr. Edge was talking about. It goes into your operative report. That's where it can be found. David Winchester? Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't ask this in a yes or no question. So for this question, yeah. So do you use the staging manual for staging patients for patient care? Is that a yes or a no? Yeah, you just go ahead and put your hands up so we can kind of get a look. So you're actually using something that's there, and not just memory when you use it. So about half, maybe? Dr. Amin.
Make a point on behalf of the pathology community. A point on behalf of the pathology community, because the CAP checklists have all the elements that are required. I mean, speaking from a pure pathologist viewpoint, many of them are using the CAP checklist. And so, and I know for oncology colleagues, many of my oncology colleagues would just go to the NCCN. I mean, either they're very subspecialized and they know, or they go to the NCCN guidelines, which often allows them to have that information in the next criteria. So there is derivative products that are indirectly using the staging manuals.
That's great.
Since this is an interactive session, I was intrigued with Dr. Dennis Krause's remark about he used a manual put out by the Head and Neck Society for staging. Is that correct?
That was adopted by the Head and Neck society and published by our organization. It was recapitulated by our organization.
Did you pay a licensing agreement to the AJCC? Do you know if they paid a licensing agreement?
I'm sure Dr. Shah, who chairs the subsecommittee, is on this this conference call, so feel free to ask.
Jason Shah, he's signed in. So Dr. Shah, you're probably on the webinar. You may have a licensing fee owed to us based on that confession. This is good interaction. Any other panelists? Dr. Carey, you want to comment on this at all? Or you want to go to the next question?
No, I mean, I think, in my group, as with others, we know, only when things change do people pull out the manual until they get used to the new one.
Okay, so next question, do you stage your patients before they're treated? So as in a prospective way with that to guide the clinical care? Yes? Okay. Any no's? Would you admit it if you were a no? Maybe not. Anybody want to comment on how that's used? Is this used in a multidisciplinary conference? Is this used in your own individual clinic? Dr. Kurtzman?
I think we're a selected group here. The problem is that I'm the chairman of the department, and a lot of cancer care is given by general surgeons without the kind of background and training we have. So the challenge is not us. The challenge is the other 80% of the people who are taking care of cancer patients.
So that may be a side question to say, in your facility, do you think you stand out as an exception about the use of staging, or is this standardized throughout your faculty or staff? And if not, is there an opportunity for the leadership in here to spread that back? I realize there's several questions in that. You might want to comment on is this really the choir? We're all in the choir here. That's Carrie.
Yeah, I do think it's a selected group. I mean, I think in my academic institution, everybody uses stage in the AJCC TNM system. But patients who come in from the outside, I frequently see sort of outdated, I do breast cancer, groupings that are actually not that clinically relevant anymore, but used to be, node positive, node negative, and that's all the staging that's done. So I do think there's a real, breakdown that does happen, between, academic to community. And it may be regional also.
Any brainstorming about how we can get to the community with that as either a mandate, a stick, a carrot, or a ongoing educational?
We discussed the concept of an electronic medical record hard stop and entering patient problem without a stage as one solution, but it's met some resistance.
Dr. Chang.
Well, I think I want to highlight an additional concern, which is that oftentimes incomplete, the staging information is incomplete, so it's unclear whether this was a clinically derived stage. You had asked me about this before. Rather than even specifying it's a clinical stage, we actually prefer to specify how that clinical stage was obtained because it's very informative. But there's also, particularly in the era of neoadjuvant therapy, significant changes in the pathologic stage may exist, and all of that information needs to be reported, and oftentimes one piece of that is missing, and it's unclear exactly what information we're dealing with. I also think this is highly relevant as we think about how the 8th edition should adapt to changing treatments, because our prognosis is so tremendously affected by the changes in the stage assignment.
So that segued beautifully right into this question right here, which is, if you don't do this staging and prospectively, do you record this after the surgical resection, therefore the pathologic stage? Do you do both? Do you do just pathologic? How does that work? You might want to comment, Dr. Mahul?
So obviously in the prostate, the clinical stage is traditionally based on the digital rectal exam. One of the challenges is, even among specialists, not everyone seems to do a digital rectal exam, or it's difficult to find the digital rectal exam translated into the TNM or the T stage. There's still confusion whether you should use digital exam versus imaging. But I would say pathologically, I think that it's more uniform, certainly after a radical prostatectomy, because it's right there on the pathology report.
Teresa Valland?
From the registry world, we are more able to find pathological stage documented than clinical stage. if we find clinical stage, more often than not, we're finding it on a medical oncology or radiation oncology consult and not in an H&P or a pre-surgical document. So we are able to find and record physician-documented pathological stage much easier than clinical.
So what type of institution do you work in where it sounds like your surgeons aren't doing their job? Is it a COC-approved program? If so, we got to report.
I have worked in COC programs. I have worked in small community hospitals, moderate size, and teaching institutions.
Is it the same?
And pretty much the same. Pretty much the same.
Dr. Jessup.
Just quickly, Sue is doing a study of where registrars actually find this type of documentation, and I totally support what this lady has said. This is actually out of 1,000 actual case study. And I can comment from a COC survey perspective, it's quite true that when you're reviewing charts, you're most apt to find clinical stage in the medical oncologist or the radiation oncologist note and not the surgeon's note.
That's correct.
Yeah, I'm
medical oncologist, by the way.
Oh, I'm going to make a parenthetical comment that we're victims of our own success, right? So the increasing multidisciplinary nature of care means that the normal clinical pathologic sort of continuum is now kind of a mess, right? So sometimes we have clinical information about the tumor, pathologic information about the nodes, and then treatment intervention, so the pathologic stage is actually a Y pathologic stage. So we've made your job a whole lot harder, and for that I apologize.
Dr. Green.
David, I don't know whether this will come up as a question, but I think this organization,
right now,
since we're talking about clinical staging, needs to take a page out of CAP and push for synoptic reporting of imaging studies. I want to congratulate Dr. Strigley and the Cancer Care Ontario group who have done some of this. RSNA, I understand, the Radiological Society of North America has something, but we as an organization need to push for this because I think this will help in the management of the cancer patient to have a good synoptic report and to take the ambiguities out of what's in traditional imaging reports.
Dr. Gershenwald.
So related to some of the discussion just a few minutes ago about content harmonization, maybe not at the granular level of the report, but in the staging rules themselves, the word imaging is used a few times, and it's really completely unclear what that means. So this would be an invitation for anyone from the radiology community to join forces here, and maybe we can get some initial outlay of what that actually means and how we can use that for staging most effectively, and then dovetail into a more granular exercise down the road.
I think the pathologists in the audience would agree that the impetus for the CAP protocol and the synoptic reporting came from the Commission on Cancer, making it a requirement for accreditation to have that as part of their requirement. It was a real lever for, and we should think about that with radiology as well.
The stick.
Yep.
Dr. Compton.
Yes, that's exactly right. In fact, there was a lot of pushback initially from the pathology community itself in using synoptic reporting, using any kind of standardized reporting. They preferred poetic license in signing out pathology cases. And therefore, there was a lot of variation and omission of critical information and different types of critical information from case to case, even from the same pathologist. And Dr. Shrigley made a formal study about this in the Canadian system after implementing synoptic reports, how the completeness of reporting increased dramatically, which can only increase the quality of cancer care. So you're absolutely right, the stick was really essential, but now the pathologists have come full circle and recognize this as one of the changes that they've implemented that has contributed greatly to increasing the quality of the standard of care. And I also wanted to say one thing about, we haven't mentioned it, but in terms of we mentioned the use of the manual when you're staging a patient. But for the pathologist, the use of the atlas is also an incredibly important instrument to make sure that you're locating all of the essential regional nodes and that you're separating those from the non-regional nodes and getting the anatomy right so that you're looking at the right things under the microscope is an essential element in getting stage correctly reported and assessed. So maybe that's not an instrument that the other clinicians use as much as pathologists, but I just wanted to note that.
And maybe, Dr. Halamka, if you can address the radiologic standards implementation. You may already be covering that, but that's a key for this body. That's a key. Do we need to make some progress? Do we need to use a stick? Are there sticks in place? Are there incentives? And look forward to your comments on that. So there's a hand up over here. Dr. Amin.
I'll just briefly sort of modify the comments in that really this is a two-pronged approach. One has to come from the radiology community, which are the experts on the matter. But in addition to the stick, it's really more for the societies that they don't want to see as encumbering more work on their specialty. So it's not just a stick, but really making sure that this happens in a much more interactive way. So I just wanted to modify the stick because that's actually how it worked, is that the college didn't want to make, because of the natural resistance that other radiologists would have, this could be used as a stick, but more as an interactive to say this is in the best interest of the patients.
Do you have any tweets, Ashley, that we need to address? Nobody's tweeting. A bunch of old people on the phone. Dr. Green, do you want to comment on a clinical or pathologic M0 or MX?
Well, we all hate the dreaded X. I would follow up on Carolyn's comment. You see, as a surveyor, when I go around, because we look at 30 path forms now, I'm still seeing X reported in the pathology forms. Even though CAP sent a letter out a few years ago at our behalf, we're still seeing pathologists. So what happens is that this is picked up by the clinician. And as you know, it becomes unstageable if you use this and try to put it into the NCDB. Now, luckily, our registrars can stage. I think they're the best stagers, really. The registrar is the best stager.
They know they are.
Yeah, the clinicians can stage or the registrar can stage. So they recognize that they shouldn't use X. So I just want to make the plea that maybe CAP can go out with another tweet.
I brought it up because I see it as well.
They must be writing it in on the checklist because MX is not on the checklist.
Quick comment, because we're going to keep moving.
Yes, this MX issue arose from, I think, 2 editions ago when CAP was trying to coordinate its checklist development with the AJCC basic staging rules. So it harks back to the need to have really crisply defined basic staging rules because from a pathologic point of view, distant metastasis is usually unknown. And it confused the community when pathologists were using it in that very literal way. Now we've, of course, taken it off the protocols altogether because it was too confusing. But that was the way that we communicated to the registrars and to our fellow clinicians that we didn't know the status, pathologically speaking, of distant metastasis. But when we do get cytology or tissue that has tumor in it from a distant site, and we can confirm that, that's part of the report that we send out on the protocol.
You can have an M1, we know that.
An M1. Right, so we can never say it's M0. We can never say that. We've taken MX off the table, so we can only report M1 when it's there.
Dr. Beth.
Just a brief operational reality that might be a target for correction of the problem. When you look at the life cycle of the information systems that pathology departments use, they have intrinsic paper-based templates that can be printed from the electronic version or electronic templates themselves. And these configurations often are set in time and, for better or for worse, are difficult to change. So what you may be seeing is the carryover of the prior presence of the MX, which will die very hard. And one way to change this is through, for example, CAP accreditation to make, for example, a phase 2 deficiency having old templates which are not current with the professional expectation. And right now I'm pretty sure there is no such phase 2 deficiency, that your templates do not match the expectation. So that may be a way of steering the persistence of this unwanted data element.
Dr. Shrigley.
We've been talking about standardized pathology and radiology, but we should talk about standardized operative report recording as well, because there's a lot of stuff when a pathologist is looking at an operative report that's done in a narrative fashion. There's a lot of stuff that we can't find, and some important negative observations are not often found in those reports. So there's been a number of key pilots done in Canada on structured OR reporting, which I think are very relevant.
Yeah, that's a good question that's not on here, but of the surgeons in the room, are any of you using templated op notes at this point? Raise your hand if you are. So few, but for that reason, if you do, are the components of stage or operative findings that would be relevant to stage in that is the other part. A lot of room for improvement there. Quick yes or no here. This was raised by Dr. Lallier. Do physicians at your institution have a portion of their compensation or performance appraisal linked to proper staging? Is anybody? We had a yes here. Dr. Mal is a yes, sort of. Qualified yes?
Sort of. It was in our metrics. However, there's not been transparency to determine so far if it's being used and what amount of compensation is attached to it. So it's a little bit nebulous.
So you're planning an audit. You're planning an audit.
Someone is.
Someone is. Okay, let's move along. Okay, in your institution, is it mandatory to record staging within an EMR or an EHR? Yes? No? Mandatory to record staging. Not that many, maybe 4. Okay, does that mean the rest is no? Does everybody else want to put no's up? Okay. Is there an I don't know, I'm not sure group? Okay. Dr. Balch, you were a yes on that. You want to make a comment?
You have to fill out the form. I think a lot of this would depend upon which EMR systems that we have at our institution.
And that leads right into this question. So Dr. Mal.
Just a quick comment about EMR. So we use Epic. Probably others in this room use it. That's the big player. And they're really good about not letting a clinician close out the encounter without the billing, and the things that the administrators care about. But no one has proposed not letting you close the chart out unless you put the stage. That would be something that they could do. But to my knowledge, I don't know if any of the clinicians in here have that rule where you can't close out your encounter unless you put stage.
So Dr. Halamka, there's another question that you might want to address. And he's going to. He's set. He knows our questions. We have Dr. Jessup and then Dr. Grishamwald.
Just a quick question for the audience. When do the docs actually have to enter stage, when you do, into your systems? One of the things in this review of documents is that it's not clear that the usual sorts of documents that the docs enter, including discharge summaries, actually will contain this. And the clinic notes are oftentimes missing from many of the EMR systems. So how does the EMR and when does it get a doc's input?
You have the answer to that, Dr. Elijah?
Yep. So in my system, we use Epic, and when the patient comes with the diagnosis initially, what we have to enter, because diagnosis for a lot of them is going to be a surgical staging, so we enter workup in progress. The next time that patient shows up on Epic, which is usually post-op check, I will be mandated to enter the TNM stage. Yes, because I have the pathology report and everything. Yeah.
So we've heard a little bit about Epic. Let's jump to this question, and I can come back to your questions. How many people you have Epic in their system? Use Epic. Okay, so as we anticipated, that's a big player. That's at least 2/3 to probably 3/4 of the clinicians. How about Cerner? I'm a Cerner. Okay, about less than 1/4. McKesson, probably another. No McKesson. Any of the other ones listed? Anyone that? Scott?
We have Cerner inpatient and all scripts outpatient.
Yeah.
And so when I do my op note.
So why don't you talk about how you work with that? Where would staging be in either using the oncology summary in Cerner, or where is your
No, because when they're inpatients, I can't pathologically stage them.
So, in all
so they're
scripts.
outpatients in all scripts.
Right.
And all scripts doesn't have a place for staging.
Right. For those of you whose CERN are for both, how is staging entered? A couple of CERNers out here. Not really. Okay, so this is epic dominant. All right, now back, Dr. Shrigley, you were going to make a comment or a question?
Well, I was just going to say that if you're electronically implementing CAP checklists, whether it's in CERN or Meditech or Intuitive or whatever, you're forced to put in the pathological stage before you can actually proceed. Anything that's a mandatory element, it won't even let you go past. So it just forces the pathological staging. So that's a good way of doing it for the pathologist.
So again, I said we know that EHRs are coming forward, but this is a should question. Anytime there's a should question, that there's a judgment involved with that. So anybody want to make a statement or a comment about how staging should be guided? Paper products, web-based, EHRs, schemes directly linked to treatment guidelines, such as NCN guidelines or others? On what? All of them? Okay. Paper too? You're still okay with paper?
Many people don't have this, and we're not just dividing staging for large medical centers in the United States.
So I'm sure Dr. Halamka will fill us in about what the percentage of the U.S. healthcare system is electronically complete or partial. Okay, great. All right, let's go on a little bit. We've just got a couple more minutes left here because we're going to stay on time and make sure we have time for Dr. Halamka. Of the 8th edition products that you might use, right now as a committee, as an organization, we have committed toward coming out with a text version of our next product, a web-based product, and an EHR integrated product as our deliverables. Of those, which of those might you use? Anybody want to make a comment? Is there a dominant one that you'll use? The staging manual, are you going to be looking for the web-based tool? No comments? Okay. Yes, Teresa.
I've got a comment.
Sure.
What I usually do when I have a text as well as a web-based tool, I will go to the web-based tool first. If I cannot find it in the web-based tool, because often web-based tools can tend to be truncated, then I will go to the text.
Good. So this question, other uses of staging. Anybody want to comment about their use of staging for clinical trials enrollment, treatment guideline concordance, assessment of screening, cancer surveillance tumor burden, cancer outcome studies? In your own practice or institutions, are you using staging for all of these, some of these? Is it irrelevant? Dr. Balch?
David, this might be a good time. The editorial board agreed that each chapter will have a segment on clinical trials design and stratification criteria that would be recommended by the AJCC. And I think it's a very important stake in the ground to have a consistency of stratification trials worldwide so that the outcomes of trials can be compared across trials, whether they're conducted in the United States, Europe, Asia, or other places.
It is a good time. So I think this was a short session. We didn't want to make this a long session and have a 30-minute, why am I standing here, ending. What I liked as a facilitator was equal airtime and great participation from the room. I apologize to the webinar participants that they weren't able to participate and they didn't tweet. They had an opportunity there if they joined Twitter. We want the feedback from you in the audience. Should we continue this type of format as a component of the general session in subsequent annual meetings? And maybe we can send out an email, instead of answering that now, send out an email to our participants and have them answer that question. It's okay to say no. If you say yes, please put in what you would like to see in it. Similar format, case-based presentations, we talked about that as well, or other. And that will just reinforce these two who built this up to come up with something further. So thank you. Thank you. Do you have a comment now? Okay. No, it's okay. We're done. So I want to actually make sure we use all of our time for our keynote speaker. I want to introduce Dr. John Halamka. Dr. Halamka was identified to our group because several heard his lecture at the Interoperability Symposium here in Chicago about 3 months ago or so, something like that. And those who heard it said, this is exactly what we need to be talking about and hearing about. So we invited him. He was going to be in Chicago. We got him hooked because he was going to be here anyway yesterday, only to have that meeting disappear, and then he was stuck still having to come to us. He graciously, he said, once I make a commitment, I'm committed. He still came, and we're delighted to have him. He's the Chief Information Officer for Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and Harvard Medical School, and you're the Dean of Technology at Harvard as well. But probably one of the biggest things he's going to talk about is his role as chair of the U.S. Healthcare Information Technical Standards Panel, the HITSP, and perhaps you'll mention your work with Microsoft a little bit, too. We're delighted to have you here.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, it has been an exciting week because Monday I took the red eye out to Cupertino to help Tim Cook and Bono introduce the iPhone and the Apple Watch. And so I was just looking for some of the smoke effects here. Where's the lighting? It was actually kind of an interesting, it was a religious experience. But I can reflect actually on why having these new Apple products will be salient to some of the things you've been talking about today with regard to staging and electronic reporting. So this is an extraordinarily sophisticated group. Let's see, I am going, where are we in your slides here? This should be forward. Okay, here we go. There we go, great. As I reviewed your website, reviewed some of your materials, looked at some of the standards that you've worked on, as you suggested, using the electronic checklists and some of the vocabularies you've adopted, what I recognize is that the stuff that's going on in Washington right now is actually something that needs your help. I mean, we're going to go through what is Cara DeSalvo, CMS, Office of National Coordinator, all these groups working on, and there's some things that have nice overlap with your needs, and there are other gaps where I didn't, for example, recognize the importance of the electronic cancer checklist as structured data elements for the synoptic reporting that you want to do, and at the moment that isn't in the roadmap for the country's electronic health record requirements. So let's talk through that. So if you look through what is happening right now, there are basically 5 areas of focus in Washington. There's the Get Us from Meaningful Use Stage 2 to Stage 3, at a time when, you guys are clinicians, so you know, there's unbelievable burnout and fatigue. It's as if we've been running a marathon every single day for about the last 4 years. CIOs are overburdened, clinicians have 12 minutes to see the patient, deliver compassionate care, never commit an error, meet 140 quality requirements, do synoptic reporting. Oh, you just can't do it. So how do we avoid overburdening clinicians while doing the electronic data capture that you need? I'll reflect on some of that. We have ICD-10 coming, deferred a year. Now, ICD-10, I'm sure you guys probably have some opinions about it, but I'll just tell you mine. It helps no one. It will actually do huge harm. It will waste billions of dollars. It's a project I'd love to see go away. Unfortunately, it won't. So reflect on at least how we can survive it. We have security and privacy concerns. As we are building more registries and more decision support, we have the burden of trying to prevent the leakage of data. Anyone here have a Home Depot credit card? Yes, and hopefully no naked pictures on the cloud. That's very bad. Very challenging issues there. As I've mentioned, we are getting to the post-EHR era. It's not just about gathering data in Epic and Cerner, McKesson, or whatever. It's about making decision support and population health a reality by creating aggregate databases that turn information into wisdom. And that has its own special challenge, especially given some of the ways that, as you guys have already highlighted in the last few minutes, data is not recorded at its origin in a standard way, so trying to do post-coordinated registries when the data itself may be highly unstructured is really hard. So a few things I'm working on there. And then a lot of the data is going to come from our patients and families themselves. And so as I talk through some of these issues, I want to make sure everyone in the room, and if there's anyone watching online, that I give you my HIPAA consent, because I'm going to review my wife's medical record, my medical record, my father's medical record. You all have consent. My wife's a cancer patient. So my wife was diagnosed stage 3A breast cancer December 2011, and so all of her record and the structured data capture, data flows, and decision support I, of course, have overseen. And so as I've tried to create a number of national efforts, they try to incorporate some of the lessons learned along that journey. And I did mention that at Apple, they've introduced such things as the watch and new health kit type functions of the iPhone, which actually give patients and families the opportunity to send you data about activities of daily living and observations in their treatment that you probably can't get from other sources like traditional EHRs. So here in 4-point type is the entire program of the Obama administration for the next 3 years. And I promised I would not read slides. So let me just sort of synthesize these 19 points as to what could be conceivably important to you. Now, I come from Boston. Now, I know you guys are from all over, but you know, those doctors in Boston, they're actually smarter than all the other doctors in the United States, and therefore we need our own decision support and staging rules. They're going to be far superior to those that are developed at, say, Yale or Chicago or Stanford. The problem, of course, every one of us is writing our own rule sets, our own decision support systems locally, and that is insane. What should in fact happen is exactly what you guys are doing, which is there's a canonical set of rules that are used in a consistent fashion by everyone in the country, regardless of their EHR vendor. And so the idea here is that instead of forcing Epic and Meditech and every one of these other vendors to try to recapitulate the decision support and knowledge within their system, that we would provide standards so that you're in the middle of entering a note, a web service that you guys may host here, you know, who knows, it's in the cloud somewhere, is able to take what I am entering and then provide me guidance that is consistent across the country. And that is, as you guys have outlined, and you know, I've seen you use TAP standards, SNOMED, and ECC, and all the rest. XML structures are forwarded back and forth. Gaps in documentation are highlighted. And it's not because Boston or Stanford or Texas or whoever decided the rule was good. It's because you, as the consensus body of the country, decided the rule is good. That's certainly something that's very hard to accomplish. There's sort of two ways the country has thought about doing this. One is representing knowledge, a rule set that would be transportable across EHR vendors and incorporated locally. It's just so hard to incorporate thousands of rules in a consistent format across multiple EHRs. So the probable leading way this will work is it will be a cloud-hosted decision support service called within the context of a patient record that then will result in a pleasing response, like a staging answer or an identification of a documentation gap or something like that. So we've developed a number of standards to allow this kind of interplay between an EHR and a hosted decision support system. And come 2017, the EHR vendors of America will effectively have to provide those hooks. And so that as you guys develop future decision support systems, the connectivity to the EHRs across multiple vendors should become substantially easier. As you guys know, it is sometimes hard to motivate our friends in the EHR community to adopt new standards, new technologies, and new ideas. But I think of these kinds of federal regulations as providing a floor. So it's the hooks, the tools that you need to better connect your work and the EHR vendor work. Next, closed-loop order tracking. Now, this is an interesting idea. Suppose, well, if I were to reflect on the Harvard Risk Management Foundation, that's our malpractice insurer, the leading cause of malpractice assertion in the Longwood medical area, so this is the Brigham, Dana-Farber, Joslin, Beth Israel, Deaconess, is the lab test you ordered and never followed up on. It was the cancer diagnosis that was made that you never actually looked at. And so this set of standards is ensure closed loop between order, result, and follow-up with some management escalation is available in the EHR. And this way we ensure that there's documentation that every abnormal test has been acknowledged, or if not, an action plan developed, that there's some way of ensuring that an action plan gets developed so the patient gets appropriate treatment. We actually devised a number of standards to accomplish that closed loop lab ordering, result, and sign-off with a minimal burden to docs. And that's actually probably a reasonable thing to require in 2017. The federal government has also suggested that closed-loop referral management between PCP and specialists should be incorporated into EHRs. That turns out to be devilishly hard. And we actually mapped out the workflow process between you see me in the emergency department, I'm an emergency physician, and I refer you off to a cardiologist, and you never go. How do you close that loop? Or you go to the cardiologist, and the cardiologist says bad things are going to happen, and then the PCP has to get involved. How do you close that loop? Lots of data standards work required, and we think there's just some real challenges across multiple EHRs in a heterogeneous healthcare environment like we have today of guaranteeing every one of those steps is closed. So it's work to be done, maybe not required in 2017. Now this is probably salient to some of the decision support you will do. I mean, example, my grandfather died of an interesting stomach cancer in 1969. He actually spent his work life bathing in carbon tetrachloride, which in 1969 wasn't considered that bad a thing, and today is probably considered very bad. Now, you wouldn't have known that even if he had an electronic health record in 1969, because no one gathered occupational exposures or risks or those sorts of things. So the proposal in 2017 is that we're going to not only gather things about the patient like family history, social history, race, ethnicity, gender, but also industrial and occupational roles and exposures, so at least we understand, oh, you work in the tire industry. Oh, well, that has certain risks of cancer associated with it. As well, document disability status and document such things as sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, just a quick comment for you guys, because I can see you're a pretty sophisticated group. One of the great things I get to do leading the nation's standards activities is come up with definitions like what is gender identity and sexual orientation. And I would have thought that there was a canonical list of such things, but I did train in San Francisco, so I actually know, no. There are 27 different genders, and on Halloween, God only knows. So we as a country in our EHRs would codify aspects of the patient. We'll end up, in some cases, with not canonical answers, but questions. And so you will actually get structured data that will help you in decision support to draw conclusions. But for example, sexual orientation and gender identity are actually pretty complicated and won't be a finite list. Advanced directives. Now, not exactly related to the work you do, I mean, sort of. But my father died a year ago. He had multiple sclerosis for 23 years. He had a myelodysplastic syndrome and had 3 MIs. And at the point where he was admitted to an ICU, of course, the suggestion was, well, let's see, we'll dialyze him, and while we do this intervention, we'll intubate him. And his advanced directive said, nope. If I am in a situation where it is clear that I'm not going to return to a good quality of life, I do not want to die in an ICU. I do not want interventions, testing, or other mechanical support. I want to die surrounded by family in a hospice, quite comfortable. And that's how he died. However, the care navigation I had to do to keep all of the docs away from him in today's malpractice-sensitive society, docs like to do more than the patients and families sometimes wish. And so I had to carry around advanced directive, healthcare proxy, all of this stuff. And the 2017 edition of Electronic Health Records should incorporate patient and family care preferences, especially physician orders for life-sustaining treatment, so it's clear and shared across the community. Electronic notes. Okay, so here's the gap. You can see I told you I'd answer all of the questions you asked. There is no current proposal to require structure in an electronic note. There is a yes, every encounter must have a note, there must be an operative note, there must be discharge summaries, etc. As you folks know, I mean, the challenge is that every doc in America seems to dictate or handwrite the note in a totally different way, and so the idea of having completely structured data, it's hard. And remember, there's a time cost for every structured data element we add. And so, here's the interesting debate. Is it that we have a portion of the note that's structured? It's the synoptic reporting you talked about. A portion that's non-structured. Do we allow such things as natural language processing to take unstructured notes and turn them into structured notes, realizing the recall and precision of that is not totally perfect. I mean, when you read some of the dictations that I've read, you know, the patient whose mother had breast cancer is doing fine. Now, natural language processing, reading that is going to see patient breast cancer, you know, it's very challenging to deal with this. Now, I want to be very careful here. Are there any radiologists in the group? Okay, no radiologists. Good. So as I read radiology reports, you get text that says things like completely normal X-ray, except slight hilar cloudiness. It could be pestilence, plague, death, and 5 tumors, right? And so, again, natural language processing around much of our radiology data, oh my God, I mean, it contains so many qualifiers, negatives, it's very challenging to parse. So I have begun a series of activities. They're, in effect, like IBM Watson type natural language processing with what I'll call subject, predicate, object relations. Who has what and what is the effect? You actually have to have computers try to parse the sentences as they're written. Oh, in the case of the one where I mentioned the patient's mom had breast cancer, well, that's a family history data element. If there's negation or qualification or whatever, you know, that becomes something that's part of a review of systems or whatever. It's hard work to do. So I think there's, now that I've learned more about what you guys do, there's definitely open issues around this one as to how in a national regulation we handle structured data capture in the context of a note. At the moment, we'll just require a note. Labs, well, this, of course, does cover all aspects of not only chemistry, hematology, but also pathology. The idea that we don't want faxes, we don't want any of the kinds of workflow today that take electronic data and then render it to paper and deliver it via mail or some other thing. That is, it's end-to-end delivery between the pathologist doing the test to the EHR consuming that data, structured and unstructured, seamlessly flowing. And that is going to be required. And of course, you guys are strong believers in standards like SNOMED CT. LOINC is also an appropriate standard for certain aspects of laboratory workflow. So every lab with a structured vocabulary communicated electronically as a requirement. That makes some sense. I don't know that your group so much works in the device realm, but this is sort of an interesting issue. What if I have a pacemaker, but that pacemaker has lithium batteries that are known to fail suddenly? Wouldn't I want to know? Well, today there's no way to identify who has what device implanted and how to notify them if there is a device recall or some issue. So FDA has produced a series of standards on identifying every single implantable device, and therefore be in the EHR what device you got, and then decision support about interventions should that device recall occur. This is a patient-focused issue. One of the interesting things we've done since 1999, Beth Israel Deaconess has shared every note, every pathology report, every EKG, every lab, every med with patients and families. Now, of interest, just to tell you a quick story, we have put some workflow around this. Imagine a patient goes in for a biopsy and then goes home and opens their web browser and says, oh, I have cancer. That may not necessarily be compassionate. So what we did is we put in certain stops. That is, if there's a pathology or cytology test, those are held for 1 week to give the doc who ordered it and the patient an opportunity to discuss the results before it is shared openly with the patient. But my wife, of course, has diagnostic mammogram, shows that there's some significant issues in the left breast, goes in for pathology, and then goes home, goes to her web browser, and sees a result that's held. And she says, you are the CIO of the system. I know you have access to the pathology data elements. Please share with me. It's the weekend. Do I really want to wait till Monday to find out if I have cancer? And so in her case, she would have much rather heard the bad news and then dealt with it than wait anxiously over a weekend. So, of course, I shared the results with her, as I have rights to do as a physician, and she has, of course, given me consent to look at her record. I only tell you this because this whole area of sharing data with patients and families is one that will evolve rapidly. It's more and more getting to the point
where there isn't an EHR and then a patient portal. It's more that there's a shared record where the doctors and the patients have a common view of the same data, and the patients may actually provide some data to the doctor. It's not very controversial if a patient is going to tell the doc, oh, I have medication side effects, or my activities of daily living have been impacted by your treatment, or whatever. I mean, that's data that only the patients will know. So this will become an increasing trend, more data from patients and more data sharing to patients. The idea of patient-generated healthcare data, I again want to reflect for a minute about the Apple product announcement. I have no stock in any company, by the way. I have absolutely no relationship or any compensation from any technology company out there. The idea is this. You buy a Fitbit, a Jawbone, some kind of telemetry. It actually could be a blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, glucometer. iOS 8, which is being introduced next week, has within it a secure encrypted container with interfaces to 200 consumer-level healthcare devices. It's coming out next week. And so what would happen is that you, on your iPhone, get the telemetry from how much you slept, how much you walked, what was your pulse ox, what was your glucometer readings, etc. Then you, the patient, have the decision to make. Do you share that data with another application residing on your phone? So imagine a company like TrialX, happens to be a company I've worked with in the past, that has decided that clinical research is important, and there are a lot of patients that are medical altruists and would like to contribute their data to population health or cancer registries or whatever. Well, the patient could say, I actually will now trust the TrialX app, and then TrialX would get access to the data store from all the devices in their home and be able to upload it into registries, or communicate it to EHRs, or share it with family members. Apple has specifically decided no cloud enablement of any healthcare data, period. It's not going to be replicated across devices or profiles, so that you can imagine the trickiness of an adolescent female having her health information on her personal phone shared across family members. You know, this is pretty dicey stuff. So it's up to the patient. It is up to the individual to decide who to trust and when to share. But I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years is a lot more data becoming available, because Apple has 500 million customers. And this is a silly example, but it illustrates the power. So while I was out there, Tim Cook got up on stage with U2 and Bono. They were very loud, by the way. My ears are still ringing. And they decided that they would simply release U2's latest album, Invented Last Week, to all users of iTunes. So they pushed a button, and 500 million people got the album. Now, imagine any innovation we make. Regulation, I think I looked at your slides, you know, we could scream and yell at people. Can we affect 500 million people in a 5-second period? It's pretty hard, but Apple can. So thinking about the tools and apps that you might push out to patients and families or docs, it's a pretty powerful way of affecting change pretty rapidly. So keep that in mind. The watch, by the way, is a little bit strange. Not only does it gather all of this device data about you, but it has an interface that I find particularly creepy, the haptic interface, which is you have a watch, and I have a watch. I touch my watch, and your watch touches you. Now, I could imagine a medical use for this. My mom takes 5 meds, doesn't remember when to take them, so the watch touches her, and then she looks at the watch and it shows a picture of the pill she's supposed to take. Okay, maybe there's a medical use for that. But anyway, we'll sort of see where this whole touch interface goes. It's a little creepy. So secure messaging, the idea that patients and doctors need to be able to send secure messages back and forth with any payload. That's already something that has been incorporated into meaningful use to date, but there's some additional workflow suggested. One interesting challenge. Many of you, I'm sure, are working with EHRs and had to go through the Meaningful Use Attestation program. You have to give your patients and their families clinical summaries after every visit. And then the most, at least at Beth Israel Deaconess, common place to find those clinical summaries is in the recycling bin, because the patients and families don't quite know what to do with them. And so there is a notion of trying to make some of the clinical summaries, the data we share, a little bit more actionable, a little bit more relevant, and not just a lot of administrative data on a piece of paper that no one can do anything with. There is also a notion of multi-language support, so that as patients are educated about clinical conditions, we do it in the language that they're most comfortable with. And then increasing the amount of detail, structured data especially, that we start pushing provider to provider. Because again, if we're doing registry population, you probably need more structured data in a consistent form than we have today. Just a quick sin of the past. I mean, I've been doing this for about 15 years as we've tried to build interoperability between Epic and Cerner and Meditech and Allscripts and all the rest. You start off small. You know, here's a text blob I'm going to send from place to place. But if you want to populate a cancer registry, I mean, you need hundreds of structured data elements with good vocabulary controls. So we're increasingly removing optionality, constraining with templates the kind of data that should be sent, and hopefully making these summaries that are going out of our EHRs repurposable in many other tools downstream. Interesting idea here, this one kind of hard, but I like it. Imagine that I show up in an emergency department in Chicago. Probably I actually want my wife to know, I want my primary care doctor to know. There may be members of my care team that should be notified of a life event, admit, discharge, death, something like that. So there's a proposal that there is a, in fact, social network for healthcare built that enables under patient control notifications of events that occur around the healthcare system to go to arbitrary clinicians or designated family members or friends. Interesting idea. MedRec, very important that we get our medication lists right at all facets of care, inpatient, outpatient, and ED. And so we're going to be continued emphasis. There's some e-prescribing improvements and some vocabulary improvements we're working on. Immunization data going from place to place, already part of meaningful use, but the ability to read immunization information and apply decision support rules, understand gaps in immunizations, share immunizations with school nurses if appropriate, if consent is given, that sort of thing. And this one is the one that I think is going to be very important to you folks. There was in Meaningful Use Stage 2 an optional menu set item for using some early standards to populate cancer registries. It was hard because the standards are pretty embryonic, but increasingly there's this idea that there are going to be two kinds of ways that you're going to do population health, clinical trials, clinical research, etc. You either send data to a central location where it's normalized and analyzed, or you have the capacity for queries to be issued at a central location, and the query is sent to the EHR, which then delivers an answer back. And so let me give you an example of what I did with my wife. Harvard, through the Clinical Translational and Science Awards program, created some open source software. It's free, anyone can use it, called I2B2. The idea of I2B2 is that we know that using vocabularies like SNOMED that you can ask questions. Does a patient have a certain diagnosis? Is a patient of a certain age? Does a patient take a certain medication, etc.? And as long as you can represent the question in a highly controlled, structured way, if you send that question to EHRs, then the data about individual patients never needs to leave the EHR. And so it turns out, you know, the MGH and the Brigham and the Beth Israel Deaconess, they all hate each other. And so even though we're all part of the Harvard system, we compete clinically. IT people love each other, by the way, but it's, you know, the clinicians are competitive. And the idea that the MGH could take all the patient-identified data and give it to Beth Israel Deaconess or vice versa, probably not going to happen. But the idea that I could send you a question, you know, how many females 50 to 55 had stage 3A breast cancer that's HER2 negative, ER positive, progesterone positive. Oh, okay, you have 3,000 of those? Okay, can you show me across those 3,000 patients the distribution of chemotherapeutic agents and correlate that with morbidity and mortality. You know, I'm sending population-level questions, and the kinds of things I'm getting back are, oh, well, of that cohort of cancer patients, those treated with Cytoxan, adriamycin, and Taxol seem to have the most cure. Ah, okay. It's maybe not science, but it's pretty useful. It's, in effect, the last 10,000 patients like me got this treatment and had this outcome. And so this whole idea of building both the capacity for EHRs to submit data to registries and to parse incoming questions from organizations like yours is where we're looking to 2017 to build a learning healthcare system. I'm sure you guys have probably read the Institute of Medicine report on the learning healthcare system, but the big criticism we have is, suppose, pick someone. University of Chicago discovers a fabulous new treatment. Well, how long will it take that innovation to wildly disseminate to every hospital in the United States? Actually know the answer? 20 years. Typically, 20 years. And shouldn't it actually be that, say, University of Chicago discovers something and that you then decide to instantiate it in a rule that every hospital in America can actually digest that rule and start to change practice, standardized care based on the rule? So you start building tools, decision support tools on the one end, and then these data mining tools, either through registries or centralized querying on the other, and you have the basis of a learning healthcare system for far more rapid dissemination of innovation. So that's the plan for 2017. Let's see, I already mentioned some of the aspects of lab reporting. This is to report to registries operated by public health. So we have reportable lab, immunizations, and syndromic surveillance data, all going to public health for mining and for population health improvement. I want to reflect on some other interesting ways that we're starting to gather data and innovate and use it in care settings. Not only have we been involved with some of this Apple stuff, but we have been the alpha development side for Google Glass. Now, Google Glass, admittedly another strange device. I have yet to find actually a consumer use for it except the really creepy ones. Like you wear glass into a bar, it's like, she's single and likes Chardonnay. That's really creepy. The idea of Google Glass for us goes something like this. As emergency physicians, we're seeing a lot of patients, and there's a lot of activity and a lot of rapid intervention needed. Maybe a patient's heart rate is suddenly going south, or maybe here's a trauma patient you've never seen before and know nothing about. The idea that you'll walk into a room and say, oh, can you hold your breath here? Let me just go look at my iPhone. Oh, I see, here's your medication list. It doesn't work so well. So what we've done is put these QR codes, 2D barcodes, on every door of our emergency department. And so what happens is you walk into the emergency department, the Google Glass knows you're in the ED. As you walk into a room, it knows what room you're in, and it knows what patient is in the room you just walked into, and therefore it shows in your field of vision the medication list, the problem list, laboratory results, x-rays, nursing triage notes, vital signs, these sorts of things in your field of vision. And that enables much more rapid intervention in emergency situations, and we've saved a couple of lives. Example, a trauma patient comes in, we're about to administer a medication, and right as the syringe is drawn up, the physician suddenly sees the allergy list and recognizes that he would have taken that hypotensive patient and killed them should he have injected the medication in his hand, and then immediately puts it aside and does something else. So, there is, I think, an interesting application in clinical care for these kinds of wearable computers. And so, especially around endoscopy, cardiology, emergency, surgery. You guys do a lot of checklists. I mean, imagine that all the surgeons, before doing any procedure, actually have the heads up a two-of-the-one-day checklist, or as they are completing a biopsy or the procedure, a checklist which is completed in the context of this wearable computer where they are able to use voice, gesture, or other input that doesn't require the use of gloved hands in order to complete a checklist or a report. And we've started to investigate some of those technologies. Let's talk about my favorite topic, ICD-10. So remember, ICD-10 was invented by a bunch of administrators in Washington who are convinced that fraud and abuse would be reduced if we were able to have a much more highly granular coding system. Now, I like SNOMED a lot, although docs don't necessarily wake up. You might, but most docs don't think about SNOMED ontologies as part of their daily practice. But there are tools like Intelligent Medical Objects and others that allow you to take natural language and convert it to a SNOMED code, and it's all quite clinically relevant. ICD-10, I think we all know, is not a problem list vocabulary. It is not a well-structured ontology. It is a, well, it was invented for epidemiological purposes. It's a, in the United States, a billing vocabulary. It was never designed for that either. And I run a farm in Sherburne, Massachusetts, and I'm sure you want to know this is actually a guinea fowl injury, not a chicken injury, and there is an ICD-10 code for that because there are 52 ICD-10 codes for bird species and related trauma. Yeah. Who would have thought of this stuff? And so it is coming October 1, 2015, and my warning to you is I actually think it will make your data quality worse. ICD-9 is itself a flawed vocabulary that's incomplete and antiquated, but I think docs are going to have a very hard time trying to get to the granular level of code and the documentation to support that granular level of code. So there's going to be a lot of guessing. There's going to be a lot of, oh, were these the last 5 codes I used? Why don't I just use them again? So be careful if any of the registries or research you do require the use of the diagnostic administrative data, because you're going to get a lot of garbage, I think, for the first couple of years of ICD-10. There are tools, and I'm working on some of them, that will help docs get to a correct code through this natural language processing approach. So whether it's clinical documentation improvement or computer-assisted coding, it sort of takes the coding out of the realm of the doc having to walk through the craziness that is ICD-10. But it's all bleeding edge stuff. So a lot of our EHRs will just ask docs to use a pick list, and it's not going to be very accurate. So I mentioned with meaningful use, with ICD-10, with wearable devices, we're sharing more data for more purposes with more people. And the Office of Civil Rights, with the HIPAA Omnibus Rule, now has a $1.5 million fine per incident possible fee for any privacy breach that occurs because we spilled data. And I have had 2 reportable privacy breaches over the course of the last year. Tell you what those were. A chief of service, very important person, went out to the Apple store and bought a brand new MacBook Pro. Came back to his office, unplugged his desktop, plugged in his MacBook Pro, downloaded 119,000 email. That itself was pretty strange. And then closed the lid, walked away, went to a meeting, came back, and the device was gone. Now, it's a private doc with a private laptop on a private network doing private business, but if it's lost or stolen and patient data is compromised, who goes to prison? That would be me. And so I got to go to the New York Times, the Boston Globe, National Public Radio, and explain how sorry I was as the chief of service spilled 4,000 patient names and diagnoses because they just happened to be in the email that the person downloaded onto their brand new private laptop. It's now been 2 years. We've spent $600,000 in forensics, legal fees, media management, and the Office of Civil Rights still hasn't quite decided what our fine will be. But the Attorney General of the state of Massachusetts has decided that $100,000 would be a good start. And so we're still working through that one. Second issue was a imaging modality that we happen to have. And you know, I'm sure all of you work in hospitals that buy imaging modalities from a 2-letter company that begins with G, ends with E, but I won't mention it. And you may know these imaging modalities are actually not appliances. They're actually computers. And in fact, they're running advanced operating systems like Windows 95. And why? Because this company, which is a fine, fine company, did FDA 510K certification of the devices and then was told by the FDA, oh, you want to update Windows 95? Well, then you'll have to go through the certification process from scratch, and they didn't. And so what you have is these virus-prone, malware-infected, horrifically insecure devices on your hospital network. And in this case, what we do is we isolate them from the Internet. We don't allow any of these devices to even come close to a network that's publicly connected. But a maintenance person from the company came in to do a little upgrade and left it Internet connected. It was, in fact, within about 30 seconds, that became virus infected and sent 2,000 images to China. And not that anyone in China would know what to do with 2,000, say, plain films or CTs or whatever, but it is a privacy breach, and I had to go to the National Public Radio, New York Times, Boston Globe, and apologize that 2,000 patients had their x-rays sent to Shanghai. That one, luckily, the Office of Civil Rights and the Attorney General decided was not my fault, and that it was the vendor's fault for doing something so irresponsible, but they did recommend that in the future that the hospital assign an individual to follow every vendor around the hospital as they do their business to determine if they're plugging in devices to the Internet or not. Yeah, great. So I just tell you all this because you can pick up the paper on any given day, and whether it's Target, whether it's Home Depot, whether it's Jennifer Lawrence, not a day goes by where there isn't a privacy breach of some data because of either innocence. Well, in the case of Jennifer Lawrence, she answered a phishing email and provided her username and password to a Nigerian businessman. I mean, it's dumb. But in the case of some of these other breaches, it's organized crime, it's state-sponsored cyber terrorism trying to get into our registries. And you may wonder, well, why? Why would that be? Well, here's the simple answer. I can buy your Social Security number for 25 cents. That's the current going rate. I can buy your Visa card for $1. That's the current going rate. Except if you shopped at Target, then it's $1.50 because the Target breach included not only your credit card number, but the store you bought things at. And it turns out it's actually much easier to bypass all of these various forensics and security controls that Visa and MasterCard and Amex have if you buy the same products at the same store. It's a little more valuable. I'll go to your Target store and buy stuff with your name. How about your medical record? $100 to $200 on the black market for a sufficient set of medical data to commit medical identity theft. Example. I'm one of the 50 million uninsured Americans. I need a heart transplant. Now let's just look around the room. Okay, so let's say you are roughly, same body size and hair color as me. I'm going to go spend $200 buying your, say, plan or membership number, plus enough of your problem list and medication list to fake being you, and I'm going to go get a heart transplant for $1 million on your insurance policy. So this is the Willie Sutton effect. Organized crime, do they want 25 cents for a Social Security number, or $1, or $1.50? No, $200 for your medical record. That is where the money is. So we are starting to see massive attempts at breaching our registries and medical record systems by highly sophisticated malware and these very, very well-resourced organized crime syndicates. So I just tell you this because you guys are data people. It is no longer the MIT freshman going after your data. It is state-sponsored cyber terrorism and organized crime going after your data because it's valuable. So be careful. We are also seeing a need, as I mentioned, for getting beyond the EHR and getting more to care management and population health. Now, I've spent a fair amount of time with a lot of friends in Chicago, so I realize that you guys haven't quite hit the global capitated risk insurance model that has happened in Boston and other places. But right now I have $1 billion of risk contracts where we're paid a fixed dollar amount to keep patients healthy. And if we repeat an MRI, that's a cost, not a profit center. So what we're having to do is take EHR data from inpatient, outpatient, ED, put it into common registries, and then run protocols against it to look for gaps in care or redundant care or things that will allow us to predict who will be sick a year from now and make home care interventions before they become super utilizers. So this whole layer of care management medical records lays on top of the EHR, the PHR, and other existing data systems. So it's not so different from a cancer registry in that respect. It's required a lot more interoperability. It has given us an incentive to build out healthcare information exchange at scale in the Commonwealth. So you, I'm sure, have a health information exchange both at the city level, the state level, wherever you guys are from. It's probably gone bankrupt at least twice. It's very, very challenging to get incentives aligned for a lot of data sharing. But now that we've got this Affordable Care Act and different payment models, the amount we will put into healthcare information exchange for care management and registries is finally aligned. We are spending millions of dollars on this activity where in years past, data silos were common and we would rather not share data. Now we have to for our very survival. So this is good. More data liquidity is going to be very empowering to your efforts going forward. I already mentioned this already, that patients and families are seeing data, contributing data, and more the federal government is pushing this, and we're starting to see demand across patients and families for it. Examples are that a couple of years ago we started sharing every note written about you with you. Now this is tough because as an emergency department, suppose I wrote, "You're asthmatic," and you came to the emergency department with SOB. Now I know that means shortness of breath. You don't. But the guy who drove me was so nice. What do you mean? So we have to now have a little bit different attitude, knowing that every byte of data that we record will be seen by patients and families, of not using abbreviations or language which might be misinterpreted. If I wrote something like, "I am seeing this overweight, depressed man again," I'm realizing the patient's going to read that a little dicey. We do know that the FDA has decided that there are going to be some new regulations that are going to allow a proliferation of consumer-grade devices that are unregulated. FDA has broken its regulations into 3 chunks. If it is, let's say, wellness data, your Fitbit, your running, your sleep, totally unregulated. If it is administrative, I'm going to remind you to take your meds, totally unregulated. Well, if it's a device that's going to say, take a picture of you, decide you're pale, and estimate your hematocrit, that is regulated. It's a risk-based regulatory framework. So you start seeing, I think, an explosion of devices and apps that fall outside of regulation and provide us with data. Just show you some of the examples of some of the things we are doing to engage patients and families, which are kind of interesting. We received a grant from the Moore Foundation for patient-family engagement in ICUs. So we're taking data about you. We're taking patient and family preferences, environmental data about things happening in the ICU, like number of traveling nurses, number of people coming in, going out, having procedures. We actually show the patients and their families the dashboard of how risky the ICU is right now to be in. And we actually engage patients and families to help watch our work, provide checks and balances. Every patient in the ICU has a dashboard which patients and families use to see, well, what are the procedures going on today? Well, what are your care preferences today? What are your communication preferences? Do you want to be involved in rounds? These sorts of things. So I think going forward, as you guys think of novel registries, as you think of novel ways to do clinical trials and research, don't forget that the patients and families can contribute data and would love to participate, many of them. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion, but hopefully you've got a sense that we are now at a time when the technology is mature, standards are getting there for vocabularies and transport and content. We're starting to see silos of data out of EHRs break down, and we're starting to build registries to scale. And so hopefully the mission that you guys are on to provide decision support, population health analytics, and guidance to us all in the next few years will become easier. So thoughts. I tried to get to a lot of the questions that you had, but I know I missed some. So questions, concerns, yes? So what you hope is something like this, that we have, through healthcare information exchanges and some of the federal regulations, made this data liquidity possible. And so many of my registries today at Beth Israel Deaconess are human populated. It requires chart abstraction. It requires interpretation of handwriting even. Well, if the EHR has a mandated set of structured data elements and a mandatory requirement to be able to export such data elements and transport it to places like registries, that you hope you start getting better data quality and better data quantity. Now, there are gaps. The ones that I referred to, it is not in a federal regulation to require certain structured data elements around pathology testing. They're largely text blobs with SNOMED describing maybe a finding or two. But, you know, all the stuff is pretty subtle that you would use for staging. It's maybe not structured. I mean, some EHRs have it, but it's not uniformly required. So I think the gap that we all need to work on is where your registries are requiring structured data elements that are not currently captured in structured form, we either get it in structured form or ask if it's really necessary to have in a registry. So many of the quality registries that I see have stuff that will never be captured in structured form. I mean, this is not your problem exactly, but CMS, for example, decided that a quality measure for stroke care would be, did you have your stroke 1 hour and 59 minutes ago or 2 hours and 1 minute ago? No one is ever going to answer that question. You know, the data quality is going to be horrible if you ask it. So be careful. Figure out what are your minimal data requirements, what is captured as part of electronic workflow, and I think I can provide you actually with this list of what are called the common data elements for meaningful use. If those elements are not included in any federal regulation, let's figure out what we should get into the EHR of 2017, not with everything, but starting with a reasonable subset that will help you. So long answer, but more electronic, better quality, better quantity. Yes?
What should we have our pulse on as
Right, and so if you look at all of this sort of regulatory framework that we are going through today, right, we have IC10, we have the HIPAA Omnibus Rule, we have the Affordable Care Act, and we have meaningful use. As I mentioned, CIOs are feeling overwhelmed. And so you may find that there's a great IT project, and it's of a trivial nature, and it will radically improve your cancer registry. Trying to get it on a CIO's agenda, impossible. I can't get through each day. I actually tell my governance committees, the federal government has co-opted my entire agenda. So I think what you need to do is be sensitive to what it is going on operationally in your organization. The way to win is if you can align your needs with a federal regulatory need, then the project gets done. Otherwise, it may just take a while. So be very sensitive to that. The folks in the Office of National Coordinator are very well-meaning people. Actually, they work very closely with CAP and other organizations. They're very good listeners. So I think maybe the most important thing is if there are needs you have, like I learned today with ECC, that's something that should be on a radar screen. I mean, you could send it to me, that's certainly fine. But to the extent that there are organizations like yours that can ensure the Office of the National Coordinator actually gets wind of the stuff that you think is critically important for registries and ongoing standardization of care, reduction of cost, improvement of quality, getting that data into them is pretty important. Yes?
Do you have any opinions on the CDC's ambulatory reporting guide for cancer registries that was cited in Meaningful Use 2 that may or may not be actually being used anywhere in the country at this point in time? And will Meaningful Use Stage 3 go ahead like the CDC is going ahead with getting that on an HL7 ballot, getting it more of a CDA standard, and where do you see that kind of thing going?
Right. Okay, so is this being recorded? Okay. I'll be completely honest and transparent. I always am. I love my colleagues at the CDC. They're really great, hardworking people, and sometimes in the past, the CDC has gone off in a direction which is perfect for CDC and public health. It just doesn't align with quite the rest of the standards activities, and they create an implementation guide which is fit for purpose. It just doesn't get implemented because it's not totally aligned with everything else in the ecosystem. And so HL7 is increasingly an important organization as we look to standards making. You're going to see some evolution of standards. Today, some of our standards are very hard to implement. And they were created over many years by informatics experts, not by implementers. And so it's fun when I meet with sometimes the informatics crowd, and they say, we have invented the perfect standard. Well, give me an example. Well, you know that a year from now, you might want to order a CBC. So you should have future ordering capability baked into the standard. Well, that does sound fascinating. It's just in my 30 years of practice, I've never had that need. And so if you bake that into the standard, are you telling me that every single time I have any lab result reported anywhere that I have to have a field for a future order, yes or no? So wait, you are mucking up 99.9999999% of the data traffic for a need that no one's ever had? And that's the challenge that we've had with some of our previous standards. So HL7 working on a new generation of standards, FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, FHIR, which is the kind of data standard that Google, Amazon, and Facebook would create. It isn't 5,000 data elements, most of which you won't use. It's what are the minimal necessary data elements that someone could implement quickly to great effect. And so I think what you're going to see is some of these esoteric standards that didn't get widely implemented are going to get supplanted by a next generation of far simpler standards. So FHIR is now a draft standard for trial use. It's beginning. You know, it's next 2-3 years going to get more and more mature. But that would be my sense is that, I mean, you'll see a blog post from me on Wednesday actually reflecting on your question because I wrote it on the plane here. That suggests that the roadmap for the next couple of years are skinnying down the number of standards that we have, focusing on getting the basics much better, and creating implementation guides that a 16-year-old can do, not a team of informatics PhDs. So long answer, but to say, I hear your problem, and I think some of the esoteric CDC standards will become less important. FHIR will become more important. Oh, of course.
Look forward to future interactions.
Oh, well, absolutely. And I would just tell you, I live by email and I live by blog. And so anytime you have a question or an issue, I mean, feel free. I will continue to chair the standards activity for at least another 18 months. I do here run into a term limit. But then again, as my term expires, so does President Obama. So who knows? Term-wise, not in reality. So anyway, so happy to be here and look forward to it.
I don't know how fast you need to take off to the airport if people have individual questions. Are you going to be here for a few, or do you need to go?
You know, I think they are sending 3 minutes.
Maybe we better get you downstairs. So this finalizes our general session. The executive has a meeting at 12:30. There's some lunch available, I think, for everyone. Thank you all for attending the general session. Did you get an expense form? No.
Yeah.